Hello! Devil May Cry. Let's begin. It's very common for parrying in an action game to be relegated to a particular button or input. Pressing the button will put the player character in a parry state for a certain amount of time and might play an animation. If an enemy's attack connects during that window, a parry will initiate. The Neos, the Bayos, the Fromborn games, Breath of the Kingdom, Ghost of Tsushima, Sonic Frontiers, Star Wars Jedi, that's not a good name, Kena Bridge of Spirits, Hogwarts Legacy, God of War, Stranger of Paradise, Seafood Vein, Stellar Blade, The Surge, Lies of P, Lords of the Fallen, Valkyrie, Goddamn Elysium, and many more, I'm sure. It's a very common mechanic, basically the default for parrying these days, and I'm a big fan of it. That being said, Devil May Cry Goddamn 1's parry system from over 20 years ago has quite a bit more going on. In DMC, an attack is parried when the hitbox of your attack collides with that of the enemy's attack. Almost all your melee attacks are on the table, and as such, DMC1 has around 25 parry inputs. Instead of merely needing to press a button when an enemy's attack would collide with you, you need to choose which button to press. Instead of practicing the timing for your dedicated parry action, you need to familiarize yourself with the timings, hitboxes, and movements associated with each of your attacks. This is a common enough parry mechanic in 2D games, and it's as old as at least Kung Fu Master? Is this a parry? But I haven't seen it in many 3D games. Kingdom Hearts comes to mind. Did you know that Kingdom Hearts was really good? Recently, Final Fantasy XVI featured it, made by people who worked on DMC and Kingdom Hearts, okay. And the OG 3D Zeldas feature it to a degree. I don't think it's a coincidence that these are mostly early 3D action games. These developers may have just been following 2D convention when adapting this mechanic, despite the challenges a third axis might pose. Thanks to lock-on systems, you and the enemy will mostly be facing each other as if you were on a 2D plane, but even then, slight differences in position can make what felt like it should have been a parry, not. Attacks might slide past each other, which is impossible in 2D. It doesn't surprise me that the default mechanic has become the default. Between keeping the player stationary, being tied to a single exclusive input, having a single consistent timing, and often being omnidirectional, the default method is simply easier to work with. But man, parrying in DMC and Kingdom Hearts, it's just so much cooler. It's more varied, it feels less context-sensitive, if you know what I mean, and it has far more potential for interesting game design. This video will analyze the first boss to really attempt to realize that potential. But we'll get to that in a bit. The DMC series has thankfully retained this parry mechanic throughout its entries, but incarnations in subsequent games are a little different to the first iteration. So what are the consequences of parrying in DMC1? Many enemies can block Dante. Either they have a shield or a part of their body Dante can't penetrate, which is weird because I'd let Dante penetrate any part. When blocked, a couple things happen. Dante's attack bounces off the target, he's pushed back a little, he's put in a recoil animation, his combo is interrupted, and the player earns a little bit of DT. So, attacking an enemy, even if they're blocking, is a worthwhile thing to do, although it may be safer to stick to guns. The effect of being blocked is altered significantly when Dante's in Devil Trigger. The enemy will still block the damage, but Dante's attacks will not be interrupted. You can wail through an entire combo while being blocked. If you do a DT Helm Splitter on a Death Scissors, you'll slide through the scissors instead of bouncing off them. If you do a DT Rising High Time, you can follow through into the air without being pushed back as usual. The reason I bring all this up is obviously because it's relevant to how parrying works. In DMC, a parry occurs when the hitbox of your attack collides with that of an enemy attack, and when this happens, it triggers a unique reaction from the enemy, and Dante reacts as if his attack was blocked. That means recoil, dropped combo, pushed back a bit, touch of DT in human mode, and none of those consequences in DT. For the sake of clarity going forward, I'm going to draw the distinction here between a soft parry and a hard parry. A soft parry is when Dante recoils or is bounced back in the air, such as when he's in human mode, whereas a hard parry is what happens in DT, where the attack is parried but Dante is unaffected. I draw this distinction because there are instances where Dante can hard parry outside of DT. If you parry with a fully charged Ifrit attack, it will be a hard parry, even if you're not in DT. Rolling Blaze will always be a hard parry, presumably because if not, it would kinda suck as an evasive move. Then there are projectiles. If you parry a projectile, it will always be a hard parry. Most of your moves will detonate projectiles on impact, but a slash from Alistair can return them to sender. If that projectile has a homing property, they'll home in on the enemy instead. Come on, that's cool. Kingdom Hearts has this too. Did you know Kingdom Hearts was
really fucking good?
So yes, to summarize, this is a soft parry, this is a hard parry. Get it? Good. In human mode, there's a small range of recoil animations depending on which attack is being blocked. There's one animation for all of Ifrit's grounded attacks and Alistair's melee combo. There's one animation for most of Alistair's attacks, but there is a special one for the second hit in the combo, the backswing. And there are unique animations for the aerials, Helm Splitter and Jump Kick, that have him bouncing back in the air. Rising High Time is a special case though. This attack launches you. If it gets blocked before you can lift off, it will net the usual recoil animation. But if it gets blocked a little bit into the attack, the game considers Dante airborne, and he'll get sent flipping backwards. I like that. That's clean. A nifty piece of hidden tech is the fact that bouncing off an enemy with Helm Splitter actually resets Dante's double jump. This will be invaluable moving forward. There's a lot going on with the parry system in this game, which is kinda crazy given how early into the genre it is and how flippantly the game treats it. It is an incidental mechanic, something that isn't featured much, something that you never really have to engage with, and something that is only flat out required once in the entire game. Despite me singing the parry system's praises, only 6 of the 20 enemy types, including bosses, feature at least one parryable attack. Phantom's fireballs can be parried back at him, Mundus and his dragon's fireballs can be parried back at him, Nightmare's spikes can be parried to stun him, and Nightmare's little missile things can be parried back at him. All of these are high-risk, decent to high-reward options. The other parryable enemies are the scissor enemies. Hitting their weapon will knock them back and open them up for an easy kill shot. This is cheating, kind of. These enemy types are constantly blocking, so hitting them at any time, even with a shotgun, will trigger this response. It just so happens that it will still play out if you hit them while they're attacking. Hence, a parry, I think. Kinda hard to read these guys sometimes. And that's it for DMC1. Suck it, Sekiro, thanks for watching. Except, of course, for Nelo Angelo. This boss, the rival fight, Virgil, pushed the parry system to its furthest extent. However, parrying is not the focus of DMC. You can find consistent strategies to take this guy down without ever having to parry him. But you want to parry him. Come on. It's canon. There's a reason the one time you have to parry in the game is the prelude to his final fight. Anyway, it's time we talk about Nelo, and allow me some song and dance to impress upon you the significance of this guy. Nelo Angelo, or for the sake of this segment, Nero Angelo, is Devil May Cry. No single character or indeed event has made as large an impact on the story of the franchise. In many ways, his existence determined the series' future, and in every subsequent game, basically everything comes back to him. No, not him. Him. Nero Angelo seems to be Itsuno's muse, to the extent that the Sons of Sparta saga would work fine, if not better, as the Black Angel saga. Am I being hyperbolic? In an attempt to expand the series while staying true to the source material, Itsuno decided to focus DMC3 on Virgil, the man behind the mask, and flesh out his relationship with Dante before Virgil succumbed to Nero Angelo. DMC4 focuses on Virgil's son, Nero, in a game with a lot of Angelo imagery, pitting him against a group who studied fragments of the Black Angel to create their own Angelos and turn themselves into Angelos. Finally, DMC5 focuses on Virgil in the aftermath of Nero Angelo. He splits himself into a sexy cancer patient who fights with the manifestations of his nightmares from his time as Nero Angelo, and a demonic entity that seems to be the physical embodiment of Nero Angelo, enacting his trauma on others, turning people into Angelos, summoning a bunch of Angelos, only for the game to conclude with his son, Nero, sprouting wings and becoming, as it were, the true Nero Angelo. The Black Angel. His son turns the image of his downfall into the image of his salvation. It's actually really sweet. Thank God that random Fortuna woman decided to name her son Nero. What are the odds on? Although this payoff doesn't really work in English, does it? Nelo. Itsuno's Devil May Cry is Nelo's story. Virgil's story. The Alpha and the Omega. It begins and ends with him. That's why he's called that. The saga details his downfall, his resurrection, or I guess he just didn't die?
Heard Dante killed Virgil once.
I don't know what to do with that. And ultimately, his redemption through his son. And besides his influence on the story, Nelo's aesthetic, role, design philosophy, and mechanics have been fragmented and reiterated across the rest of the games. The rival fight, teleporting enemies, Virgil, Angelos, the boss you can parry, hell, parrying in general, motherfucking Furies, all dates back to this guy. And with that, let's dive into the analysis. As you probably know, thanks to a mistranslation, Nero Angelo, Black Angel, became Nelo Angelo in the West. I imagine we're all in agreement that Nero Angelo is a cooler name, but regardless, this is Nero. I am Nero. This may also be Nero, but I will be calling him Nelo going forward. I'm sorry. If it makes it any better, when I was a kid, I called him Nelo. Nelo Angelo. So we'll go with Nelo. When Virgil's in the suit, he's Nelo. Virgil is Dante's twin brother. After his fight with Dante in DMC3, he descended into the underworld. He came across the demon king Mundus, the guy who killed his parents, and decided to fight him. He lost and became his puppet, Nelo Angelo, the Dark Emperor's Black Knight. We know this from DMC3, but in this game, we really don't know much about him, albeit enough to make an impression. In a game that's so light on narrative storytelling, it was expeditious to make this rival character Dante's twin, because so much of what we know about Dante, his motivation and what makes him special, has to do with his family, which means we can infer a lot of information about Virgil without the game needing to lift a finger. With the word brother, the game conveys that he's half demon, the son of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta who lost his mother and father to the Demon King at a young age. That's efficient. Throughout the rest of the game, we learn that he somehow fell in thrall to said Demon King, that he can fight with a sword or bare-handed, that he's cocky, perhaps more so than Dante, that he probably has mummy issues, later confirmed, that he has guts and honor, that he wears his hair slicked back, implying that he has a different sense of style to Dante, and that he likes chocolate. My chocolate. All of this conveyed through visuals, gameplay, and no more than 4 sentences. Lost your mother and brother to evil, a man with guts and honor, Virgil, Dante, and no. I want chocolate. This is how one establishes the most quintessential rival in gaming history. Well, except this twat. And yeah, no, it's good. Gameplay says a lot. Visuals say a lot. Conceptually, Nelo is part Dark Link and part Darth Vader. In terms of Dark Link, he is a dark reflection of the player character, he is parryable, and he teleports. Given DMC lifts the Z targeting system from Ocarina, I'm pretty sure inspiration was drawn here. In fact, that seems familiar too. In terms of Darth Vader, he is an imposing Dark Knight in service to the Emperor who turns out to be some white guy. They might be related. DMC was being developed during the peak of the hype for the return of Star Wars. It was the zeitgeist at this point in time. I cannot stress how everywhere it was.
Playgrounds all around the world were filled with children beating each other with sticks.
Director Kamiya is a noted Star Wars fan, loving movies like The Rise of Skywalker? So I'd be surprised if Darth wasn't on the brain at all. Obvious inspirations aside, though, I wouldn't say Nelo feels particularly derivative. I mean, he probably literally is, but he has a distinct identity nonetheless. He was designed by legendary character artist Makoto Tsuchibayashi, and despite being called Black Angel, there's actually very little black in his design. Between his armor and his cape, he rocks a grayish-green and reddish-purple color scheme. DMC's aesthetic is predominantly Western. Gothic architecture, European mythological and alchemical imagery, Dante's British.
Whoa, slow down, babe.
I keep forgetting that. Green and purple is a tried-and-true Western color scheme for villains, something you'll see a lot in comics. To paraphrase TV tropes, green is sickly and toxic, while purple is regal and powerful, which is pretty fitting for Nelo. He has a regal, stately stature, he exudes power, but he's ultimately a sick, twisted human. The gray tint of the armor and the reddish tint of the cape I think make the colors feel more at home in a gothic castle setting. Regardless, you only see him in dimly lit areas, at twilight or nighttime. He's cast in shadow, so the colors do come off as black a lot of the time. Even when he is illuminated, it's often by cold blue light, so his colors are never saturated as a result. They went for the archetypal Western color scheme, but they weren't comical about it. His cape has this design on it. I'm not sure what it means. It could be a spine branching into wings? It'd be the only part of his design that actually connotes angel, or it could be a tail. Frosts and blades have tails protruding from the back of their neck, and their enemy file distinguishes them in particular as being created by Mundus. So as much as this design could connote angel, which admittedly isn't that much, it could also connote demon, created by Mundus. So yeah, that actually works. He has a horn motif on his knees and helmet evoking modern satanic imagery, and his helmet has a face on it. Given that we've been fighting puppets and incorporeal beings up until this point, when you first meet Nelo, there's a good chance you'd assume that this suit of armor just is his body. This is a demon. Who knows what forms they take? And I think the face on the mask is what cements this effect. It's not until the cutscene after you first beat him and he reacts to Dante's necklace that you should start to suspect that there's actually someone inside there. The mask has these white accents, and the horns have red, the only instances of these colors in his design, and I think it's significant that they're found on his face, the part of the body most evocative of identity. His face is the most human aspect of any enemy in the game, and the white could hint towards the good behind the mask, some notion of innocence. Or, if we go with Eastern symbolism, it could convey death, all of which are suitable for a character who's not in control of his actions. He is innocent in this regard. As you could say, his loss of agency is a death of his identity, in a way. The horns are a demonic touch, and the red could be alluding to Dante, and the notion that the demonic element in Virgil connects the two of them. Maybe that's a reach. I like my colors, it's okay. I think the most striking aspect of his design are his glowing orange eyes. In gameplay, they stick out like headlights, and there are times when he's in shadow or he's silhouetted against the light that they're the only things you can see. When it comes to character design in action games, it's good to include some element that trails behind the character to emphasize movement. Hence Dante's coat, Hotsuma's scarf in Shinobi, Bayo's ribbons, Ryu Hayabusa's fat, shiny dumper. Nelo's cape does some of the work, but I think his eyes actually do the heavy lifting. They leave Akira light trails wherever he moves, and it has a very distinct effect. Capes and coats work well enough for the player, whom you mostly view from behind, but you often view Nelo from the front. So this addition was a creative little way to convey movement through his face. He also has these neon gamer light strips pulsating up and down his body and sword. They're quite subtle, but they convey the sense of power or energy coursing through him. In the second and third fight, they actually reflect his health. By default, the lights are blue, but as the fight goes on, they become purple and then red. I don't know why, but they turn red almost immediately in the first fight. I don't know, weird touch. You'll notice that when you hit Nelo, small shards fly off him, as if you're slowly chipping through his armor, and eventually, you'll see something shatter. It took a while for me to realize that you actually destroy his armor piece by piece, or rather, 2 pieces at a time. His left spolder and knee plate, his right knee plate and chest piece, and finally his right spolder and waist plates get destroyed in that order, leaving him looking a lot darker and a lot less impressive by the end of the fight. You realize that he's actually quite thin and lanky. Thanks to these touches, Nelo has one of the most dynamic character models in the entire series, and is the enemy that least needs a bar to communicate his health. I'm a slut for conveying information diegetically, and the feeling of breaking something is always nice to evoke in these games, so it's an approach I wish was more prevalent in the series. It's something Kamiya went on to leverage very effectively for every enemy in Bayonetta. As for this fight in particular, this detail lends itself to some cool visual storytelling. You could say that his armor breaks as the fight goes on and leave it at that, and maybe that is all that was intended, but given what we know about this guy, you could question whether or not the armor is the boss. The more we chip away at it, the weaker Mundus's grasp on him or something. You don't fully destroy his armor in the first fight, which tracks with why the fight is still going on in the cutscene as opposed to the other two. There may be something there. Going forward in the series, we know that Virgil is associated with the color blue, and this was actually planned since DMC1, as was his more refined sense of style, as we can see in this early artwork by Tsuchibayashi. Incidentally, this guy went on to do the art for Shinobi shortly afterwards, and as such designed Moritsune, the protagonist's silver-haired, katana-wielding twin brother who gets possessed by a demon enthralled to the main antagonist. Shinobi did do the demon helicopter first, though. Anyway, Virgil's trademark color is blue, but it isn't featured at all in Nelo's physical design, only through his emissions. His blood, I think this is blood, his meteors, and his summon swords are blue, as are the flames and smog that accompany his attacks and his teleport. In his final battle, he goes Super Saiyan and casts a blue aura around himself. These details have aged wonderfully given the direction subsequent games went with Virgil. We associate him with the color blue, and as such we can attribute these elements more to the person beneath the mask than the entity controlling him. And, fittingly, they're what should be attributed to Virgil. What Mundus would want out of controlling him. His attacks, his power, to be used in service to Mundus, and his body, his blood, to be shed in service to Mundus. The rest of his design, his armor and its color scheme, can be attributed entirely to Mundus. In fact, since green and purple are the two secondary colors you can get from blue, you could argue they represent a perversion or corruption of Virgil's blue. I like my colors. I go too deep sometimes. It's okay. It's all very fitting in retrospect. But in the context of DMC1, the game, there's no indication that blue is supposed to be associated with Virgil and not simply Nelo, whether or not it was intended to be. In fact, in the early stages of design, Tsuchibayashi associated Virgil with some white guy. The use of blue here is probably first and foremost to support Nelo's role as a rival, by contrasting with Dante's red. In the context of the bosses in this game, Nelo's most distinct trait is the fact that he's just a dude that seems to be an equal match for Dante. He's the rival fight. He's distinguished further from the other bosses through his placement. He's one of the first bosses you meet, but one of the last bosses you kill. You can tell there's something more narratively significant about this guy. He is introduced first as Dante's warped reflection, and the similarities between the two are most apparent in his moveset. Most of Nelo's moveset consists of attacks that reflect Dante's, and the devs straight reuse many of Dante's animations. He has Stinger, High Time, Rising High Time, Helm Splitter, the 4-hit combo. He can chain the second punch of Ifrit's combo into the kick. He has an uppercut, he can jump kick, and he can use Meteor. Light emission is always present before releasing his energy that's generated by converging the surrounding energy? Oh! A nice detail that works to portray Nelo as an inversion of Dante is the fact that his sword is enwreathed in fire and his meteor seems more electric. Whereas Dante's sword courses with electricity and his meteors are fiery. Nero. Fiery sword. Hey, that attack looks familiar. He can also use both of Dante's taunts. And I said he may be even cockier because he has an additional one. This taunt actually just repurposes the wind-up of Ifrit's punch, but since he's got his massive sword in his other hand, your focus is drawn to him holding it out rather than him pulling his other arm back. Clever. This taunt lends a bit of distinct characterization. Dante's taunts both convey the same notion of, "What you doing, bro? Come on." And while Virgil uses these as well, his additional taunt reads more as, "Oh, I'm so fucking based." It expresses some degree of pride or self-satisfaction. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, unconfidence and self-reassurance. You know, if you need to flex to look tough, maybe you ain't that tough. So, between his weapons and taunting, he can do a lot of what Dante can do. Unlike Dante, though, he can switch between weapons mid-combo. That sounds nice, but to even things out, Nelo has no devil trigger. However, in DMC3, the corrupted Virgil outfit allows you to transform into Nelo as his DT, and I wonder if that was the intent here. Perhaps the sword he wields is in fact Devil Sword Mundus, or something along those lines, and this suit of armor is the demon form it bestows. Mundus's DT, as it were. Works with the idea that the armor is the boss, right? I do like the idea of Mundus being so powerful and evil that when you channel his power, it ends up directing you rather than you it. This could also explain how the armor regenerates between fights. It's demon magic, or whatever. I prefer that to thinking Virgil retreats to the closet to reapply his fit each time. But speaking of Devil Sword Mundus, his sword. It's big. Big sword. Its size plays a few roles. First being, it's imposing, sure. Second, it acts as a convincing shield. It's clear from this image that you probably won't be able to hurt Nelo here. Third, it's easy to read. As this fight is so parry-centric and parrying has to do with hitboxes, the devs ensured Nelo's hitboxes were painfully obvious. The fire that surrounds his sword when he strikes also works to that end. It maps the arc of his swing so the player can get a good idea what they're working with. Unfortunately, the HD remaster is a significant step down from the PS2 original in this regard, but the result in the remaster is still functional. Barely. It's clear when and where he's attacking, and as a parrier, what you should be aiming for. Fourthly, and finally, it just makes parrying more likely, because there's more sword to hit. The last thing to mention about aesthetics is his voice.
Let's do this! Got a rock-hard ranger!
Thanks to his later depictions, we're to assume that his voice is being modified by demon shit. I believe this, in DMC5,
Just a little longer.
Was supposed to be the same deal, an attempt to smooth over the difference between the two voice actors. Nelo can't talk, only communicating in grunts and laughter, pain and pleasure, as it were. Virgil can only express his most basal emotions in this form. That's kind of cool. They hired a whole-ass voice actor for a couple uhs and a ha. Money well spent, sir. And I think that's all by way of aesthetics. Overall, Nelo's design is pretty solid. For the most part, it merely conveys imposing Dark Knight, which is all you really need. He looks cool. Now, this might be a personal taste thing, but I think I would appreciate a few more details that belie more about him. You have the white lines on his face and the design on his cape, both of which need quite a bit of reading into, so I'm thinking something more overt. For example, Nelo's armor could have incorporated some of Mundus's trademark hand imagery. It would convey the idea that this person is being held, constrained, choked by Mundus. It would be overt enough that you wouldn't miss it, but vague enough that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on the implications, especially since you wouldn't equate Mundus to hands until the end of the game. It would also age very well, but that's neither here nor there. I think some touches along these lines could have been a great addition. Things that come off as incidental or unassuming, but seem a lot more significant in retrospect. The strongest aspects of the design to me are the eyes, what they achieve in action, and of course, the dynamic elements. The breaking armor and changing lights. These touches still stand out as remarkable in the series and are simply excellent additions. Having the fight start with a broad-shouldered, bulky knight and end with a dark, scrawny figure is a brilliant bit of visual storytelling, and is an example of exactly what I was talking about. It implies that there's something off, malnourished, lacking in Nelo the person, but all of that is hidden beneath the armor. And you wouldn't necessarily think that that has any greater significance in the moment. It's very good shit. One point of contention I have, though, is the fire that surrounds his sword. It's used well to indicate when and where he's attacking, but I still can't help seeing it as a missed opportunity to indicate more. I distinctly remember watching this fight for the first time as a kid, because I was too scared to play DMC1, and even then, upon seeing the flames, I thought, the fire probably means something I'm not getting. What exacerbates this impression is the fact that after he attacks, it takes a moment for the flames to go away. Similarly, if you attack him while he's blocking and he retaliates, his sword won't ignite during his telegraph, when it otherwise would. So he can ostensibly be attacking without igniting his sword, and his sword can be ignited when he's not attacking. These are well-intended details, and from one perspective they're quite cool. Giving the flame a couple seconds to fade makes it feel more real, more consequential. These are actual flames. Just because the sword isn't generating them at the moment doesn't mean they'll vanish immediately. They need time to die down. If you keep parrying his attempts to attack, he doesn't have an opportunity to ignite his sword. These details work to ground what is otherwise a mechanical consideration in the context. It's good. The downside, however, is that they obfuscate what that mechanical consideration is. A newcomer may have a harder time intuiting the simple fact of his sword lights up when he attacks. They, like 11-year-old me, might think there's more to it. There's a hidden meaning to the flames, and upon finding out there really isn't, you kinda can't help but think, oh, it would be cool if there was, though. Near 20 years later, I am completely vindicated in this observation because it seems the developers of DMC5 agreed. Cavalier Angelo is a reiteration of this fight. She charges her sword with electricity. Usually, if you parry her, she'll retaliate, but if that charge runs out, you know your next parry will stun her. This could have been applied to Nelo verbatim. It's perfect. Use what already functions as a cool aesthetic touch to convey mechanical information that isn't conveyed anywhere else. The flames are a nice addition, but particularly in the HD remaster, they're kind of redundant, right? His animations communicate that he's attacking. The flames just emphasize them. They succeed in doing so. Their inclusion as is justified. It's just that they so easily could have done more. But with that said, we have reached the end of the aesthetics segment. I'll get to music and arena design later, because now it's time to dive into the mechanics. But I should note that this will be a deep dive into the HD remaster of DMC1. I'm not sure if there are any specific mechanical differences with this boss, but my understanding is that enemies across the board did more damage in the PS2 original. And why? But with that, let's begin. As an action game, the boss fights in DMC of course test the player's understanding and mastery of their moveset, their timing, their ability to evade, and their ability to ascertain any exploitable quirks of the boss's design or behavior. Standard action shit. Atop this foundation, however, DMC bosses should ideally also present opportunities to style. Your typical DMC boss is an opponent that lends itself to a varied, cinematic, and one-sided fight scene if the player is able to exploit the mechanics properly. There is a discussion to be had about what constitutes style and how DMC1 differs from its sequels, but we'll get to that much later. For now, suffice it to say that boss fights in DMC should look cool when played well. Dante should look cool, and that coolness should be proportional to player input, a result of otherwise context-insensitive actions being applied in a certain context, rather than Kingdom Hearts reaction commands or God of War grabs, which are stylish but require little input from the player. So, on top of considering how the mechanics at play here work to provide an appropriate challenge or an engaging fight, you should also consider how the ways the player is meant to contend with these mechanics look. When left in the hands of the player, do these mechanics translate to a compelling fight scene? Keep that in mind as we go on. Nelo appears 3 times throughout the game, and a phantom of him appears in Nightmare's dimension. I won't be talking about that fight much. It's the same as the second, but he has less health. That's it. The first 2 fights are quite similar, whereas the third shakes things up a bit. However, the underlying mechanics and behaviors remain largely the same, so I'll be talking about those first. I'll go over the few differences between the first and the second fight, and I'll go balls deep in the third much later. So let's get into it. 2 words that spring to mind when considering Nelo are reactivity and unpredictability. Nelo is a uniquely reactive boss in the context of this game. Like most enemies, his behavior is affected by your proximity to him, but unlike any other boss, he reacts to each of your physical hits with a stagger. Certain things you can do will cause him to block. Hit him while he's blocking and he'll retaliate. He'll teleport if you pressure him in certain ways, certain actions will bait certain reactions, and of course, you can parry him. You have a lot of control over what he can do and what he ends up doing. Between staggering and parrying, you can technically interrupt every single one of Nelo's attacks. As such, Nelo is the boss that you can visibly bully the most. He can essentially be stunned or on the back foot for the entire fight as you beat him into a pulp. Some strategies, particularly with Ifrit, can make this easy, but barring those, this is quite a bit harder than it sounds because Nelo is also the least predictable boss in the game. And that's down to a few factors. 1. From a neutral position, he can, like most bosses, pull from a move pool at random, the largest in the game besides Mundus. 2. He can teleport, the first enemy in the series to do so, and there's no way to tell where he's going to reappear and attack you from. 3. He can string together fast individual moves in a couple of different ways to keep you on edge. And 4, because he has a variety of responses to getting parried, most of which require an immediate response from you, but all of which can eventually lead you to an opening if you respond appropriately. Across his moveset, Nelo can perform 11 distinct sword strikes, which you can hard or soft parry with any of 25 attacks, which means there are, if my math is right, technically 506 distinct parry interactions on the table in this fight. Already, that's fucking awesome. Already, you can see how this setup could lead to a stylish, varied, and cinematic fight scene. A boss that incentivizes parrying. With the parry system of this game, 506 distinct parry interactions before we get to gameplay I wouldn't describe as incidental. Parrying is not required in this fight. Yes, Devil May Cry is very good, who knew? Now, to be fair, I am being a bit dramatic. While you can parry all of Nelo's sword attacks with any one of yours, these options aren't all available at once. This fight is not about seeing an attack coming and choosing one of many viable responses to it. It's about seeing an attack coming and knowing which of your many responses are the right ones given your position. Remember, parrying has to do with hitboxes colliding, so whereas a stinger may be the correct response to his 4-hit combo from a distance, it may not be the correct response when close. Consequently, there are quite a few of Nelo's attacks that are damn near, if not downright, impossible to parry with some of yours. I doubt you could parry Helm Splitter with the 4th hit of Alistair's physical combo, but, theoretically, if these hitboxes collided, a parry would ensue. Now, with this spelled out, consider how teleporting works with this system. Nelo can immediately change the distance between you at will, thus determining your parry options. It also stresses one of the most fundamental challenges in DMC: aiming. Your directional inputs, where you need to aim the stick, depends on the enemy's position in relation to Dante. When Nelo teleports in, you have to quickly comport yourself to the correct direction, read his attack, consider the distance between you, and input the relevant action. What a solid formula. I wonder if we'll see it again. As such, I'd say Nelo is the strictest test of aiming in DMC1. The strictest test of arguably the most fundamental system in the game. Already, I think you can see how Nelo is simultaneously a mechanical challenge befitting a boss and a system that translates to a cool fight scene. And we've barely started. From a neutral position, that is to say, walking, Nelo can perform 6 sword attacks, 2 melee attacks, a ranged attack, he can teleport, and he can zoo. That's 9 attacks at his disposal and 2 movement moves. His move pool and behaviors are dependent on your distance to him. The further away, the smaller the move pool becomes, so I'm going to start us off at long range and move us closer. At long range, Nelo can do 1 attack, Meteor. Otherwise, he can either teleport to get closer to you, or he can zoo. His Meteor is a basic projectile. You can't parry it, all you can do is dodge it. It's accompanied by a distinct audio cue, so you should be able to hear it coming from off-screen, and it produces light, so if Nelo's just off-screen, you may be able to see it illuminating the walls. Oh, that's what that meant! Of his moves, Meteor actually has the longest wind-up, and he's completely open to attack while readying it. He's also liable to spam it once he gets going, meaning you're free to shoot at him while he does so. Nelo is particularly resistant to gun damage, though, but the grenade gun still got that. Meaningfully, there's not much you can do here besides getting close and interrupting him. However, there is a trick. If you're not quick enough and you're too close in front of Nelo, he'll react with a stinger poke. The telegraph on this thing is non-fucking existent. It do feel like bullshit, but it is 100% consistent. He will do this if you're too close to him after he finishes Meteor. You need to stagger him before that. It's a punishment. A move you're not meant to trigger rather than a move you're meant to respond to. Not to say you can't. Ultimately, this move is a way to punish you at range and encourage you to get closer to him. And it works as solid encouragement because it's basically just a big opening. If you're in stinger or jump kick range, as soon as he starts readying it, you know you're getting a hit in. Zoom is an interesting move. When he zooms towards you, he can instantly cancel it into any other move. And since he'll zoom in close, he'll be able to pull from a larger move pool. That being said, dude might zoom towards you and teleport away. He's just trying to psych you out. You can, of course, respond to whatever move he cancels into, but we'll get to that when we go over the rest of his moves. One of the consequences of this being a long-range maneuver is that there's a good chance he'll perform it from off-screen, which can be very dangerous as there's no audio cue. However, both Meteor and Teleport do have an audio cue, and if he's walking, you can hear his footsteps. So if he is off-screen, at long range, and you don't hear anything, you can pretty reliably take that to mean he's zooming. This works surprisingly well. It's cool that the lack of a tell functions as a tell here, and it makes Dante look, and you feel, like an absolute maverick when you respond to it. How did he do that? You can't see that. If Nelo isn't using any of these 3 moves, he'll be walking instead. If you try shooting him here, he may take it, or you might cause him to block. If he starts blocking and you stop shooting, he'll just kind of chill. He might taunt you. Hilarious. And that's long range. Between Meteor, Teleport, and Zoo, it's clear this boss wants you to get close to him. He will not provide you many options at range. At close range, his move pool grows from 1 to 9. He can now also use his 4-hit combo, High Time, Rising High Time, Stinger, 2 variations of a horizontal /dash lovingly called Streak, and his melee attacks, Punch Kick, and Uppercut. Oh, fuck you. At this range, Nelo's at his most dangerous. He can use all of his attacks, he's at his least predictable, and this is probably where you'll be spending most of the fight. The first move I want to address is High Time, because it's a particularly special move, and you'll be seeing it a lot. As a sword attack, it can of course be parried, and if you hit him during the wind-up, you can stagger him out of it. But it comes out very quickly, and it doesn't give you much of an opening afterwards. What makes High Time so dangerous is the fact that the telegraph has him sweeping backwards, potentially out of your range. So, say you're going to hit him, he'll dodge you with the telegraph, then hit you with the high time. It's rough. What makes high time so special is the fact that it has two permutations, regular high time and rising high time, that brings him into the air. There is no way to distinguish between the two until he's airborne, so it's the least predictable of all his attacks. Being airborne grants him access to his two aerial moves, Helm Splitter and Jump Kick. He will always follow up a rising high time with one of these, and which one he chooses is dependent on your distance from him. He'll use the one more likely to hit you. Helm Splitter if you're close, Jump Kick if you're far. As a sword attack, you can parry Helm Splitter, and you can stagger him out of Jump Kick if you hit him. Now, moving forward, whenever I mention high time, remember that really means high time or rising high time into an aerial combo. High time crops up a lot, and whenever he uses it, it might be a rising high time instead. This move constantly keeps you on your toes. Once he completes an aerial combo, he will taunt afterwards. There are some attacks that he will 100% taunt after if he completes them uninterrupted. An aerial combo is one such example, as is his 4-hit combo and punch kick. These taunts are openings you can hang your hat on. But of course, the coolest thing to do with this knowledge is learn to taunt in unison. That's awesome. I'm glad he has predictable taunts to allow for that. There's a good chance he'll follow up Streak and Stinger with a taunt, but only if he hits you with them, so hopefully you won't be seeing this. What a cunt. Moving on. His melee attacks, punch kick, uppercut, and jump kick, can't be parried, so your only options are to avoid or interrupt. His punch-kick combo is easily interrupted by hitting him. His uppercut is the most annoying move at his disposal. It is the one attack he has that can't be interrupted at all, and mercifully it has a generous windup. The issue is that the beginning of that windup is damn near identical to that of punch kick. To such an extent that in earlier drafts of this script, I went on a whole tirade about how you can sometimes stagger him out of uppercut with no rhyme or reason behind it. No, it is uninterruptible, I was just confusing it with punch kick. For a boss where so many of his attacks are parryable or staggerable, it makes sense to give him some way of definitively putting you on the back foot. A fuck off move, if you will, and holy hell it can fuck right off. If he hits you with this attack, you're dead. We're playing on DMD, by the way. The reason this attack will one-shot you is because he always follows it with high time, and you know what I mean when I say high time. But it is a special high time in that it has no telegraph. See, he doesn't sweep back first. It's simply part of the uppercut combo. The uppercut itself can be broken into 3 segments: the wind-up, the dig, and the payoff. It has a particularly long telegraph. 2 beats before he actually hits you. Think of it like you can do 2 quick actions before the payoff. This is good because if you accidentally go for a regular slash or punch, you still have time to get out of the way. As a one-shot, this move needs the caveat. As with all of his moves, however, there are ways to turn it to your advantage, and that is down to the fact that the uppercut is ultimately a protracted telegraph for an incoming high time. I wasn't lying when I said you can technically interrupt all his attacks. You just can't interrupt the first part of this one. There is a small break between the payoff and high time where you can stagger him out of it, or you can anticipate the high time and parry it. Regardless, this is still his single most dangerous move. Now for his parryable moves, starting with Streak because it's also a bit special. This move has 2 variations, a quick one and a slow one. The quick one can be interrupted by staggering him, like most moves, but the slow one can't. The slow Streak is like the sword equivalent of the uppercut, a fuck-off attack. The only other move Nelo has that he cannot be staggered out of, so it has an equally long telegraph. Unlike uppercut, however, it can be parried. But since the hitbox activates as he dashes past you, it's impossible if you're too close to him. You need to fuck off. Incidentally, if Nelo hits you with a regular high time, he will always combo into a slow Streak, so watch out for that. Streak is the only sword move Dante doesn't have, and in terms of characterizing Nelo, it's perfect. If you look at the wind-up animation, he holds his sword in a very odd way for a greatsword like this, but in a very appropriate way for a katana. It's as if he's sheathing his blade and drawing it when he attacks. The official name for streak in the Japanese guidebook is yaigiri, quick draw technique. This is a feature of yaijutsu, or iaido, the katana-based fighting style Virgil in subsequent games is loosely based on. Concept art confirms Virgil was always envisioned as a weeb, a British katana wielder, but nothing in-game actually reveals that, except for these attacks. If you're really sharp-eyed and deductive, these moves could lead you to the conclusion that Nelo is being controlled as early as the first fight. Why is he practicing yaijutsu when he's wielding a greatsword? It implies that this is not his weapon of choice, and that begs the question, why isn't he using his weapon of choice? Perhaps he doesn't have a choice. It could also imply that Nelo may not be fully aware of what he's doing. He's using the techniques he's familiar with despite wielding the wrong weapon. However, while this detail fits perfectly with the stories of subsequent games, it does raise a bit of an eyebrow as far as this game is concerned. It's implied that Virgil was abducted as a child, so why does he have experience with a katana? The assumption you'd have to run with is that Dante and Virgil learned to fight at a very young age, which does check out. It's just that you need to arrive at this conclusion through assumption. But that's it for Streak. Next is Stinger, and there's actually very little to say. You can stagger him out of it, but since his hitbox appears almost immediately, it's more likely to result in a parry if you're in front of him. A point of note is that the stance he assumes when he uses it is the same stance used for Zoo. However, his sword glows when using Stinger, so you can tell them apart. Before moving on to the final parryable attack, there's a trend you may have noticed with those I just went over. High time might be a rising high time. He can follow rising immediately with a helm splitter or a jump kick. The telegraph for punch, kick, and uppercut are easily mistaken. There are two versions of Streak, and Stinger uses the same animation as Zoo. There seems to have been a concerted effort on the devs' part to make Nelo, what's the word? Tricky? Surprising? I know unpredictable, that's certainly a part of it, but that's not exactly what I'm getting at. It makes him hard to read, hard to learn. From a mechanical standpoint, he keeps you wary. It's hard to get comfortable with his moveset, and in the case of High Time, it's downright impossible. From a contextual standpoint, this detail imparts to me, more so than any other enemy in the game, the impression that this dude actually knows how to fight. Whereas other bosses try to hit you, throw a bunch of shit at you, Nelo has practiced techniques that he can modify for the situation. High time or rising? Quick or slow streak? Do I use Stinger to hit him or merely to get close? Whereas other bosses read as a display of power, Nelo reads more as a display of skill. And there are other elements that contribute to this effect that we'll get to later. His final parryable attack, the 4-hit combo, is what you might call his main attack. Neutral triangle, if you will, and it's a key element of this fight. This combo is actually the same as Dante's 5-hit combo, but without the finisher. You know, dude, if you just press triangle one more time— oh, never mind. He telegraphs this attack by holding his sword up for a beat, although that beat is minuscule in the third fight. You can actually attack here and parry him before he's begun swinging. Once he's telegraphed, he will do the 4 hits in his combo, each of which are parryable. The combo is essentially a one-hit KO, but you can jump away at certain intervals. When it comes to staggering him out of this attack, there's some stuff to talk about. Nelo has 2 hurt boxes, one for his front and one for his back. His front hurt box becomes invulnerable during any of his sword attacks. When his sword hitbox is active, his front hurt box is inactive. You can see I use Inferno, an AoE with no parry property, and he just powers the fuck through, taking no damage. This is because his front hurt box is inactive during his attack. This is true for all of his sword attacks, but it's most notable here because between his long telegraph and his 4 slashes, he becomes invulnerable from the front for quite a while. This quirk makes sense, because attacking him while he's swinging his sword should result in a parry. You could conceptualize it as, when his sword is out, he's technically blocking. My guess is that this quirk was necessary to make parrying work the way it does. A hint as to how it actually works, programming-wise, is the fact that Meteor can hit him regardless. Maybe because it can pierce through guards, or perhaps it goes through and hits his back. Regardless, to interrupt the forehit, you either hit him between his swings, hit him from behind, or parry him. And that is close range. He's at his most dangerous with his widest selection of attacks, 9 in total to choose from, and he'll likely go from one attack directly into the next. But let's say you enter super close range. Getting right up to him, his move pool shrinks from 9 to 3. 4-hit combo, high time, and punch kick. And of those 3, 4-hit combo is the most likely by an insane degree. This range also has a special quirk. As soon as you enter it, literally the moment you do so, he'll attack. And that attack will be the 4-hit combo like 95% of the time. If you're already in his range and you've staggered him, he'll do it as soon as the stagger animation ends. If he's just attacked, he'll do it as soon as that animation ends. Basically, if you're in his face, he'll attack as soon as he's able to. Unless he's primed to teleport or block, and we'll get to that later. This is a behavior you can almost set your watch by, but there's a low chance he might do a punch kick or a high time. There may be more determining what makes him choose the other moves, but I haven't noticed any trend. High time is particularly dangerous here thanks to his sweep back, so you do have to stay alert, but it's much more likely he'll use the 4-hit anyway. And this is one of the most brilliant touches of this fight. There are at least 2 reasons why. Firstly, if you can predict when he's going to use a sword attack, you can learn to respond as or even before he uses it, making this one of the most reliable parry opportunities in the fight. Secondly, say you're at a distance and you stinger or jump kick towards him. Provided he's not doing something else, as your attack brings you into his range, it will trigger an attack. There's a low chance you'll trigger punch kick and get the hit in. There's a low chance he might counter you with a high time, that's scary. But there's a high chance he'll ready 4-hit combo and you'll parry it. Or rather, he'll parry you. So this behavioral quirk works both as a reliable parry opportunity and a defense mechanism. It works to both of your benefits, and from a visual perspective, it makes it so both you and Nelo can respond to each other at impossible speeds. Who's parrying who here? It just makes the fight that touch more stylish. Each character seem more skilled and impressive. Overall, super close range is an excellent aspect of the fight. It makes so much sense to reward courage like this. At close range, he's at his most unpredictable and dangerous, but if you put yourself even more directly in the line of fire, you're rewarded with far more predictable behaviors. It's easier to parry if you know what he's going to do, and you're in a better place to hit him. However, if you dodge, retreat, or get hit, you'll enter close range again, and he'll be more dangerous than ever. If you keep your aggression up, you might hit him into close range, and he'll be more dangerous than ever. Think about this. You have 2 agents, all of whose interactions involve bouncing off each other, pushing the other one back, and your incentive is to stay as close as possible. It's a simple, yet deceptively engaging dynamic. He has one last special move that he'll only use in a very specific scenario. If you're at super close range and high in the air, he'll try to punish you with a rising high time. This one's special though because it has no telegraph. Like the post-meteor stinger poke, this is a punishment, a move that you're not supposed to trigger. But it doesn't make going airborne a complete no-go. If he's engaged in any other attack animation, you can rest easy, and Nelo's so aggressive at close range that he'll likely start an attack before you get high enough to trigger this anyway. But still, something to watch out for. But with that, those are all of the moves he'll use depending on your range. But before wrapping up this segment, there are a few fundamentals to cover. Firstly, when left to his devices, Nelo can be in one of 2 states, using a move or walking. Oh, he's building concentration. He often springs from one move directly into the next, but if you have a bit of distance, he might walk. Appropriately, but counterintuitively, Nelo is more open when he's attacking than when he's walking. If he's committed to an animation, he is committed, and he'll respond consistently. You know if he's using punch kick that he's vulnerable for the entirety of the attack. If he's walking, however, he can spring into any attack at any time. This is when you can trigger his aerial counter. This is when you can trigger his defense mechanism by stingering into super close range. However, even this can be a bit of a gamble. He may choose to begin an attack before you get close enough. In most cases, this will actually leave him open, but it may be a fuck-off attack you need to respond to, or a high time that pulls him out of reach. This is another of those elements that makes Nelo feel like a more skillful opponent. It's an element that portrays Dante as more skillful in kind. He's only truly open when he's attacking. You can only really get an opening when you're besting one of his techniques, exploiting an attack. If you attack him while he appears open, if you make the first move, he's gonna try and exploit yours. Secondly, when you hit Nelo, he will snap towards or away from you depending on which hurtbox you strike. He usually doesn't respond to guns like this, but he will if he's stunned, and this just looks really funny. Otherwise, it's a praiseworthy touch. If you hit him at an odd angle, like from the side, the game makes it clear which hurtbox your attack actually collided with, which is important information because it will affect what he does next. It also makes responding to whatever his next action is far more reliable. Once you've hit him, you'll always be in a consistent orientation. You can imagine how useful this is when it comes to parrying him. Finally, it's important to mention that Nelo has 4 stagger animations, 2 for his front and 2 for his back, and a 5th if you count hitting him in the air. From the front, a regular combo hit, e.g. a light attack, will push him back a little, staggering him for 45 frames, 3/4 of a second. A directional attack or combo finisher, e.g. a heavy attack, will push him further, out of your range, staggering him for 90 frames, 1.5 seconds. Getting a feel for these animations is key, because he'll go straight into his next action as soon as they end. Given your range and other factors, some of which I'll get into later, you can infer what that action will be and prepare accordingly. For example, and this is important, if you hit him from the front with a light attack and leave him be, he will 100% attack as soon as the stagger animation ends. We'll talk about this later. If you hit him with a heavy attack, he will block you if you try to follow up. We'll talk about this later. If you leave him be, though, there's no guarantee he'll do anything. If you're at super close range, he'll probably do his 4 hit, but if you're at a bit of a distance, he might start walking, use another attack, or teleport away. If he's in defense mode, he might start blocking unprompted. We'll get to blocking. From behind, the stagger animation from a heavy attack is functionally identical to that for the front. However, the animation for a light attack, while lasting just as long as a light attack to the front, also pushes him quite a bit away from you. This means there is a real risk of knocking him out of your range mid-combo, so that's something to watch out for. And with that, we have covered his surface-level behaviors. Let's do a quick rerun to solidify it all. At a distance, he has a limited move pool that works to either close the distance or punish you for being a pussy. As you get closer, his move pool gets wider, he gets more dangerous, but you're afforded more opportunities to hit him. Every one of his attacks can be exploited via staggering and/or parrying. At super close range, your courage is rewarded with a much smaller move pool and far more predictable behavior. However, at many intervals, he can shake the fight up and teleport to whatever range he wants. And when at range, he can close distances immediately with Zoom. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about Zoom. It's wonderful. It's hilarious, but what is this? Nelo's pathfinding can have serious trouble, making Zoom downright impossible to read sometimes. It works well enough for the most part, and ultimately the destination is more important than the journey in this case. As long as he consistently ends up in front of you, you should be able to respond, but he doesn't. It's rare, but sometimes things just get weird. It can really throw you off, and getting hit as a result is the one instance in this fight that feels straight up unfair. I consider Zoom to be the weakest aspect of this fight. When he gets close, he'll cancel into any of his other moves. If he chooses Stinger, he seamlessly transitions into it. I've found the best response is generally to stinger into him mid-zoom, and I imagine this is what the developers would have wanted. The twins zooming at each other from a distance, it just looks correct. And it tends to work. Once you enter his range, he'll begin the animation for whatever attack he wants, and you'll either parry it, stagger him out of it, or if he chooses a fuck-off attack, you should still be able to get out of the way. But even this can be inconsistent though. Occasionally, high time will pull him out of your reach. Occasionally, you won't have enough time to avoid his fuck-off attacks. Occasionally, you'll just get hit. It's all down to when exactly your attack puts you in range to trigger his. And while you can guesstimate accurately a lot of the time, the wonkiness of zoom can mess this up in subtle ways. If you're prioritizing not getting hit, it's probably better to let him zoom and focus on evading, which is a shame. This is far more satisfying. So, the most basic of basic strategies when it comes to Nelo is to play reactively. Avoid attacks and retaliate immediately after, or stagger him out of them when you can. Yeah, he's a boss. Since he might block you if you attack him from the front, and we haven't gone over any ways to deal with that yet, the best way to exploit his openings is to get behind him. He obviously cannot block you from behind, so you can get out a full combo and then he'll teleport away. Once he reappears, he'll go for another attack, and yeah, avoid an attack, get behind, punish, ad mortem. And if you want, that is as complex as the fight has to get. Learn how to avoid 9 attacks and punish the opening. And pro gamer hyper expert tip here, just jump the fuck over him. Bait his attacks and jump over them. This avoids, basically all of these attacks. The 2 exceptions are high time and 4-hit. Just don't fuck around with high time. Back off unless you can stagger him out of it. And with 4-hit, you just want to get away from him at first. But he'll always taunt afterwards, and that's your cue. So, for the most part, just make sure he's committed to an attack animation, wait for the right moment, jump over him, and bingo. I'd say it's not that simple, but it really is that simple if you want it to be. Parrying is not required in this fight. DMC's combat prioritizes giving the player multiple modes of approach, and all of the abilities are optional. You can always scrape through with the bare essentials, and even just looking at those essentials, you still have a couple of distinct approaches here for any one attack. Avoid it either with a dodge or a jump, and punish his opening either from the front or behind, or stagger him out of it. So, there are your multiple approaches already if you're looking to engage with this fight in the most basic way possible. But I know you. You're not basic. You're not gonna exclusively try to attack Nelo from behind. You've got a couple of qualities that prevent you from doing that. When Nelo first appears, he doesn't attack Dante. He draws his sword, and Dante remarks,
This stinking hole was the last place I thought I'd find anyone with some guts.
presumably appreciating that Nelo didn't sneak attack him. Then Nelo goes, bro, this room is hella small, we ain't having a good fight here, follow me. Ooh, look at me, I'm so dope, praise the sun, lol. Alright, let's go. Nelo is quite literally the inventor of invader etiquette in Dark Souls. The first invader to not sneak attack the host. The first invader to bring the host to a better area to fight in. And the first invader to emote to signal the beginning of the fight. Devil May Cry was very much ahead of its time. This interaction establishes something very important about Nelo. He's less interested in killing you than he is having a good fight. He wants this battle to be legendary, and he's willing to give you the space and time you need to go as hard as you can, to give it your all, because that's what's going to make this a good fight. As Dante sums up, guts and honor. This is kinda like hesitation is defeat in Sekiro, a mantra expressed by one of the characters that is very applicable to getting the most out of the game, or at least this fight. Nelo is exhibiting what the game wants you to exhibit. Hence this guy literally being Dante's reflection. While I praised how making Virgil Dante's twin was a very expeditious storytelling choice, how we could learn a lot about Virgil from what we know of Dante, here we get to learn more about the game's conception of Dante from how Virgil acts. Guts and honor. Let's start with guts. Exclusively attacking him from behind is pussy shit. Sure, you take the opening when it presents itself, but for the most part, you need to have the guts to face this guy head on. This is where parrying comes in. Let's get a few details out of the way. First off, when you parry, Nelo will always snap to face you. It's a very beneficial addition once you get used to it, but it can throw you off before you learn to expect it. Next, there isn't any sort of unique, consistent parry indicator, an effect like a flash or a slowdown to let you know, yes, that was a parry. There's a small spark effect occasionally, but even when it does pop up, it's extremely slight. That's kind of classy though. Nelo also doesn't recoil. When you parry him, he goes straight into his next animation, whatever it may be. As such, parrying can look kinda underwhelming, to the extent that it can be hard to register what's happening sometimes, especially if you're in Devil Trigger. Subsequent games have incorporated flashes, recoil animations, and slowdown. It's nice for a parry to have some song and dance, if for nothing other than clarity's sake. That being said, these kind of indicators can be detrimental if not handled well, especially in parry-heavy fights, especially if they don't look good. Given when this game was made, it may ultimately be for the best that the devs didn't implement something like this. DMC3's parry effect, for example, I think would detract from this fight more than it would add. But all this to say, a parry itself doesn't look particularly flashy. Luckily, looks aren't everything. Parrying feels damn near perfect. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned the challenges a third axis might pose to a system like this, but all told, Nelo gets around them pretty well. His sword is huge, his attacks are huge, Dante's hitboxes are deceptively big, so even if angles are slightly off, you're more likely to get a parry than not. The odd attacks sliding past each other does occur, of course, but I'm taken aback by how rarely this happens compared to some fights in subsequent games. She's big, but with all that out of the way, let's get into it. So, all of his sword attacks can be parried with any of your physical attacks depending on your distance. Distance, of course, affects the parry timings of an attack. If you're up close to Nelo and you use a basic sword slash, your hitboxes will collide a couple of frames into the animation. The further away you are, the more you have to preempt your attack to allow the hitbox to extend. When you parry Nelo, one of two things happens. One, he gets stunned. And I mean stunned. For a while. Check your phone, switch your weapon, give him a little tickle his balls, like whatever you want. This is the largest opening he can present. The second thing that might happen when you parry, the thing that is far more likely to happen when you parry, is that he'll instantly spring into one of three retaliations. He has his horizontal slash, his vertical slash, and high time. If you parry the retaliation, one of two things will happen, and if you keep parrying consecutively, this cycle continues until your parry results in a stun. The parry match. There's a special interaction for parrying him while he's in the air, either during a rising high time or a helm splitter. Obviously, he can't retaliate from this position, so he'll always be sent flying. This actually doesn't give you much of an advantage. You probably want to close that distance immediately, but it looks cool and it does do a bit of damage. More importantly, you're humiliating him. Good. When you're engaged in a parry match, you deal with two RNG as far as I can tell based systems. The one determining if a parry will stun him, and the one determining which retaliation he'll use. When it comes to stunning him, this gets harder over the three fights. In the first fight, he can retaliate a maximum of 4 times consecutively before you're guaranteed a stun. In the second, a maximum of 6, and in the final fight, a maximum of 8. More often than not, though, you'll stun him before you reach that point. It does feel random. In the first and second fight, it's very common for a single parry to stun him immediately. Even in the final fight, it's by no means rare. I suspect that there are ways to increase the odds of stunning him depending on which attack you parry with, but we'll get to that much later. In a parry match, although the stun might be the obvious thing to go for, it isn't your only option. all of his retaliations present an opening to hit him and stagger him out of them if you're fast enough. You might need to be in DT. Sometimes this might be what you go for. Or you might just want to get out of the way and let him finish his attack so he presents an opening. So in a parry match, there are 3 distinct endpoints to work towards, all of which are to your advantage. Let's go over his retaliations though. His vertical slash is simply that, a vertical slash that comes out quite slowly. It presents a nice opening during the wind-up, but a minuscule one afterwards. If he uses this, he's basically throwing the match. His other 2 retaliations, horizontal slash and high time, are quick and might lead into combos if you let them play out. You know the deal with high time, and his horizontal slash always leads into a high time. So 2 of the 3 retaliations, if left to play out, lead into his least predictable move. High time doesn't present much of an opening afterwards, but of course a rising high time into aerial combo will guarantee a taunt. So leaving him to play out his retaliations never ensures you a good opening, but there's always a chance. It all comes down to high time. Will he follow it into the air? Wait a minute. Rising high time into a jump kick. Hey, he learned that from me! The fact that these retaliations lead into combos is important though. You may not parry every one of Nelo's hits as they come out, but perhaps you can avoid this one and parry the next. Between his 3 retaliations, you might presume that a parry match would resemble a game of rapid-fire rock, paper, scissors. This was my suspicion when I started experimenting. One of your moves will be the ideal response to each of his. You can kinda see it. Parry his vertical slash with a high time, parry his high time with a helm splitter, parry horizontal slash with a slash of your own. It feels like these moves fit together in a way, but that's not the case. As I mentioned, the optimal response is more dependent on your position than his retaliation, although it does play a role. If you're up close to him, a basic slash can parry all of his retaliations, for example. If you're in the air, the same is true of helm splitter. Stinger is best used from a distance, but the issue is, one of his retaliations might not be compatible with your position. Mainly talking about high time, I like to think of his retaliations on a scale. Easy, medium, hard. Vertical slash is easy. No matter your position, you'll probably be able to exploit it. Horizontal slash is medium. There are a good amount of viable responses to it or its follow-up. High time is hard. You have to be in one of a few positions to exploit it. A nice bit of balancing though is that if you're able to parry a high time, there's a good chance the match ends right there, because if it happens to be rising, the game might consider him airborne. And yeah. So, as opposed to rock, paper, scissors, parry matches more resemble gambling, I guess? Depending on what retaliations he does, you can have a very easy time or not. Each of your responses will leave you in a different position, and sometimes you just have to hope he'll choose a compatible retaliation. You'll always know whether or not you can parry this retaliation, and this might be the last one, but if it isn't, you can't be sure you'll parry the next. You could get lucky, or not. Sometimes you can lock yourself into taking damage, but you still feel responsible because you probably could have avoided it if you had made a different decision earlier in the chain. If you recognize when victory is impossible soon enough, you always have a chance to get away. Getting unlucky does not necessarily mean getting hit. As for stunning him, it does kinda depend on luck. But with skill, you ensure yourself more chances to get lucky. It's this balance that really makes these engagements so compelling and replayable. You never know how it's gonna go, but you'll never get a stun if you don't roll the dice. And as long as you play your cards right, a bad roll won't cost you anything. So, might as well, right? Now, here's the rub when it comes to parry matches. Do you remember what happens when Dante gets blocked? Dante's attack bounces off the target, he's pushed back a little, he's put in a recoil animation, his combo is interrupted, and the player earns a little bit of DT. He's pushed back a little. Parrying has to do with positioning and distance. He's pushed back a little. And Nelo has the longer sword. If parry matches went on indefinitely and you just kept mashing triangle, you would lose most of the time because eventually you'll be pushed so far back that he can hit you and you can't hit him. The only exceptions are if your back is to the wall, nice, or he uses a vertical slash. Thank you. This is something you always have to contend with. With every parry, you are being pushed into a different, often slightly worse position. Of course, there's more to parry matches than mashing triangle. Between dodging, jumping, and different attacks, there are multiple ways you can stay in the game. But if we were to stick to mashing triangle, you can still make up the difference. It's been a while since I brought this up, but Devil Trigger. You want to start hard parrying him. Parrying him in Devil Trigger will have you moving closer to him. You can often end a match with 2 or 3 hits. So you might think, okay, always parry him in Devil Trigger. Well, it's not that simple either. The benefit of not being in Devil Trigger is the fact that a parry will reset your combo. From this position, you will be able to act quick enough to respond to a retaliation, be it by parrying or avoiding. In Devil Trigger, you hard parry through his attacks. And if you parry him with one of your combo finishers or a directional and he retaliates, you may not regain control of Dante in time to respond. Check out this example. I'm in the air here. If I jump kick to parry Nelo, I'll trigger a retaliation, but I'll get bounced back in the air to safety. If I jump kick in DT, I'll trigger a retaliation, but follow through to the ground, so I can get hit by that retaliation, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. There's also the issue of feedback. When you soft parry an attack, it's indicated by a sound effect, a rumble in the controller, and obviously the recoil animation. When you hard parry an attack, there's no feedback. No audio cue, no rumble, no recoil, only the enemy's reaction. It's a lot harder to read. It feels like you're slicing through butter. There's also the fact that you move quicker in Alistair's DT, and thus Nelo reacts quicker. You can get used to reading what's happening, of course, but it can take a while. So yes, DT is not a straight benefit. That being said, if you're a pro gamer, you can stay in DT as long as you're precise with which moves you use, just as you can make a parry match work in human mode by throwing in dodges, jumps, and different attacks. You can use either or a mix of the two. It's just that each form presents certain advantages and drawbacks for you to work around. And with this all laid out, can I just... Dude, this is such a fucking cool system. This is such a cool fight. The moment-to-moment decision-making here. There's so much of it. The amount of sick parry interactions I've gotten into. Activate DT so my rising high time won't be cancelled and I can follow up into the air. Deactivate DT so I can helm splitter and bounce off his sword to safety. Parry his swings with the first 3 hits of Ifrit's combo in DT so my combo isn't cancelled, then deactivate DT so my final kick is cancelled and I can respond to the next attack. This one's beautiful. Combo him in DT for the damage, cancel into round trip, anticipate his attack, deactivate DT, release to soft parry, reactivate DT to get another full combo off in DT. Do you see? That is the decision making underpinning 3 fucking seconds of this fight. Get in 2 punches, oh, he's gonna attack, activate DT and continue the combo. It's so good. It's so good. 20 years old, man. Games in the parrying subgenre don't even approach this level of complexity. Oh, press the button, press the button, press the button. Look, I love Sekiro. No, I love Sekiro. Favorite From game. Best From game. Not a debate. But seriously, suck it, Sekiro. Why have no other games I've played come close to this? 20 years. No one thought to steal this. It's right here. Please, copy this. It is correct! And all of that without even mentioning the genius of the fact that you gain DT by parrying in human mode. There is a benefit to engaging in a match even if you don't get an opening out of it. And parrying isn't even required in this fight. And we're not done. To calm myself down a little bit, there are some negatives to go over. It does bear mentioning that parry matches are fast. They can be really fast. High Time has a mere 40 frames of telegraphing for you to respond. You need to recognize which retaliation he's doing, take note of your position, choose your response, and input it in 2/3 of a second. And in the final fight, you may have to do this 8 times consecutively. With my aging reaction times, I think it's still reasonable, but borderline. I think the developers of the subsequent games may have considered this to be too demanding, though, because I can't think of another example of DMC asking you to react this quickly consecutively. Of course, subsequent games allow for finger-blistering combos, but those aren't based on reaction after reaction after reaction. Those rely on the enemy acting predictably. As we've been over, Nelo is not predictable. There are ways to give yourself more breathing room I'll expand on later, but his speed is always something to work around. On its face, this isn't a negative, just a high barrier for entry. However, it can get so fast, especially in close range matches, that it can exacerbate some of the underlying issues with the mechanics. DMC1 has somewhat unresponsive controls at times. It doesn't happen often, but often enough that, in this scenario where you have to act fast, you may pick up the habit of mashing to combat it. And of course, this can easily lead to mistakes. Another weird issue arises when he's blocking. We'll get to blocking shortly, but hitting him while he's blocking can trigger a parry match. And he can block soon after you get an opening. So hitting him while he's blocking and parrying can often bleed together if you're being aggressive. For some reason, specifically when he's blocking, DMC all of a sudden features input queuing. You can press triangle twice and queue up 2 attacks before the first one even comes out. And as far as I know, there's no way to course correct. What's really weird is that if you move the analog stick after making these inputs, the game will retroactively apply that input to the attack. So you press triangle, then hold forward, and it results in a stinger. It's really weird. The issue here is that you may find it hard to pull back when you want to. Dante will independently strike Nelo's sword, triggering a match you did not want to trigger. Ultimately, it's not a huge issue, it's an odd one for sure, and once you learn to account for it, you can, but it's something you ideally wouldn't have to account for, right? But that's it for criticisms. That's it for parry matches. Now let's look at the other role parrying plays in this fight. Parrying is not simply a way to exploit Nelo's attacks, it's also a way for him to exploit yours. This is a rival fight. In any other instance in the game, a parry is strictly rewarded. It's always a cool, effective response to an enemy's attack. Whereas here, thanks to his retaliations, Nelo is just as likely to punish you for a parry as you are him. It all comes down to who, if anyone, actually gets an opening by the end of the interaction. And until that point, who's parrying who here? In the last segment, I went over Nelo's defense mechanism. You stinger or jump kick towards him. When you enter super close range, you trigger his 4-hit, and this will result in a parry. He parried you. When you're close to him, he's liable to spring from one attack directly into the next, affording you small openings with each. Miss those openings by half a second, he'll start his next attack, and you might find yourself in a parry match when you expected to hit him. In terms of how it looks, again, he's the one parrying you. In terms of how it feels, it's really down to whether or not you were expecting it. Usually, pressing a button yields a consistent result. But since Nelo might parry you, pressing attack might yield a different result than you expected. This can obviously throw you off. In a way, Nelo makes pressing the button dangerous. You can use Devil Trigger to remove the danger. When you attack in DT, even if it results in a parry, it still yields the expected action. You won't recoil. But you can deal with the danger regardless if you learn when to expect a parry. Dante recoiling becomes the consistent result you expect of the button in that moment. When this is the case, you won't be thrown off, you can respond appropriately, and who's parrying who now? This, of course, requires far more familiarity with the fight, and no matter how good you are, you're gonna use Devil Trigger, but a novice parrier will likely rely on it more for safety. Seriously, a resource that changes the effect of a parry. That's such a genius addition. I'm sorry for harping on about it. I don't think I've seen this anywhere else. We're coming up on the end of the segment, but before moving on, I want to say a little piece here. Parrying is probably my favorite mechanic in action games, period. High-risk mechanic, turn the enemy's attack to your advantage, massive dick energy, what's not to love? DMC and Kingdom Hearts' parry system is my favorite iteration of the mechanic. I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment hammered into me by subsequent DMC games that animation variety is all but synonymous with style in combat. You've got a bunch of cool animations, throw out as many as possible. Make the most of the assets on offer. And that applies to the enemies as well. It's less cool to take out enemies that can't fight back than it is to enemies that are evidently trying. Show off some of their cool animations. But in a stylish game, in a power fantasy game, you don't want the enemy looking cool to come at your expense. Games that feature stylish dodge systems seem to understand these things. The enemy can do something cool without compromising your style because your dodge is also cool. But whereas dodging and snapping back lends a fight a give-and-take kind of rhythm, parrying is just giving right now. Both combatants are on the offensive and the defensive at the same time. DMC's parry system is probably the single most concentrated example of the philosophy and spirit of the series. Use any of your attacks, any of your wide range of cool animations, in response to the enemy's wide range of cool animations. And a fight that harnesses that gives you opportunities to parry after parry, that gives you a reason to do so with different moves, a reason to choose demon or human mode. It's excellent, man. What can I say? From a ludo-narrative point of view, parrying is kind of the perfect mechanic to accompany a rival fight. I can't think of anything that better conveys the sense of equal matchedness. You're throwing your all at him, he's throwing his all at you, and it cancels each other out. Visually, you have two forces clashing against one another, and in this moment, the tide is in no one's favor. Again, who is parrying who? This is anyone's game, and until that decisive blow comes, you're just annoying the shit out of each other. Let me fucking hit you. No, let me hit you. Mom! Gotta give credit to Ocarina for the concept, though, I think. Dark Link is the first boss I know of that supported the notion of equal matchedness through a parry mechanic, but whereas Ocarina's iteration was pretty one-dimensional, DMC took the idea and developed it into something with depth. And to go on a bit of a speculative tangent, part of me suspects the developers may have drawn inspiration from the axe armors in Castlevania. With Dark Link, there's no puzzle to parrying, no way to use it to your advantage. He parries your sword attacks, so just fucking shoot him. Axe armors, however, actually encourage parrying. They spam axes from high or low. You can avoid them, but since they boomerang back, it's best to parry them. As such, a fight with them involves reading the telegraph and responding with either a high or low attack, or by spending resources on a sub-weapon that can trivialize the affair. It can get quite frantic, and it feels kind of reminiscent of parrying Nelo, resorting to a sub-weapon somewhat reminiscent of popping DT. This is very much a vibes-based suspicion, I just get the feels, but Kamiya has cited Castlevania as one of the action games that most inspired him, so I wouldn't be surprised. And having Nelo teleport and come at you from different angles feels like a natural way to expand on this dynamic to take advantage of 3D space. Also kind of reminds me of Dracula. I've been playing a lot of Castlevania recently. But with that is the gist of parrying in this fight. Later, when I go over Dante's abilities, I'll get a bit more into the specific intricacies of a parry match, but that's all for now. To sum it up, it is a way to interrupt Nelo's attacks to create openings, at the risk of more attacks that you can interrupt to create openings. It is a way for Nelo to avoid damage and retaliate, at the risk of getting stunned. Parrying in human mode pushes you back and earns DT. Parrying in DT pushes you forward at the cost of the resource, and you can use either human or demon mode interchangeably to achieve the desired effect. Parrying. That is the guts of this fight. Getting in his face and taking him head on. Now, it's time to talk about honor. Here, we are going to delve into Nelo's two most esoteric systems. As in, I don't fully get them, blocking and teleporting. First, let's get some fundamentals out of the way. If you attack Nelo when he starts blocking, the first block doesn't really count. It doesn't interrupt my combos, see? I can follow Rising High Time into the air, but every subsequent block acts as normal. If you hit him while he's blocking, he'll eventually respond with either a retaliation, as if you had parried him, a fuck-off attack, or stinger for some reason. As such, it's by no means pointless to attack him while he's blocking. You'll gain DT, and baiting any of these responses can lead to an opening if you handle them properly. The amount of attacks he'll block before he responds is at least 2, which is by far the most likely, and I've never seen it exceed 5. If you leave him alone when he's blocking, he'll eventually do something else. It's dangerous. He might teleport away, but he might go straight into an attack, and it's hard to tell when he'll go from his static blocking stance into his next action, so you have to stay wary. But with these fundamentals out of the way, now we can ask, why would Nelo be blocking? I already mentioned that if you shoot him from a distance, he might block. I also mentioned that if you hit him with a heavy attack, he will block if you keep attacking. Some moves, like Alistair's 5-hit combo and Kick 13, will cause him to block as soon as his stagger animation ends. I'll talk a bit more about this later. But there is one more factor that might cause him to block. An underlying system I've done my best to intuit. All of your attacks, even gunshots, have an additional value associated with them. And my understanding is that when you hit Nelo with one, that value gets added to a counter. An additive value I will refer to as his defense value. Once that value passes a certain threshold, he will enter defense mode, and his behavior changes. He will block soon into any opening you get, although there is some variance in how soon. He will block as soon as he can at super close range. He'll no longer go for the 4-hit. It's my suspicion that he's more likely to retaliate consecutively before you get a stun, and finally, he's more likely to teleport away if you leave him be. Nelo punishes you for being too aggressive with fewer and smaller openings. But, if you want, you can keep him in defense mode the entire fight. Keep him on the back foot, bait his responses, and take the small windows you get. It takes a lot longer to win like this, but in a way it's a lot easier. There are far fewer things for you to react to here. While you have him pinned like this, he can't use Punch Kick, Meteor, the 4-hit combo, Quick Streak, and most importantly, he can't teleport away. If you get the ebb and flow of DT down, parrying becomes trivial. You just mash triangle. So with Stinger and all of his retaliations accounted for, you basically reduce him to a move pool of 2. As such, you can mindlessly mash triangle, watch out for the occasional fuck-off attack, and focus solely on DT and distance management. Stay in human mode while you're close to build DT, pop DT before you get pushed back too far, revert before your finisher kills you. It's really cool. There's no other fight in the game where you can apply Devil Trigger like this to such tangible results. And this can be the entire fight if you want. You're not going to want that. You'll be here for hours in the final fight, and it gets pretty boring regardless. But it might be something you choose to do for a period of the fight just to flex your dominance. It's not efficient, but there is something stylish in just pinning him like this. If you do want to be efficient, you might want to get him out of defense mode. It can be a real kick in the dick to engage in a sick multi-move parry sesh only to be rewarded with a single hit before he starts blocking again. So how do you do that? Well, firstly, it seems that letting him ready an attack decreases his value, but it won't decrease to 0 and might not even decrease past the threshold, which will result in him teleporting directly after the attack. If he attacks and exits defense mode, he'll regain his usual behaviors. But he's still liable to start blocking soon into your next opening, presumably because his defense value will still be close to the threshold. So this isn't ideal. It appears that if he uses Slow Streak or Meteor, for whatever reason, his value gets reset to 0. So that's neat, but it's up to RNGesus whether or not he chooses to use them. Or is it? The most reliable way to get him out of defense mode is to let him teleport. This will reset his value to 0. Now, teleporting is interesting. He can do it basically whenever he wants, unless you're spamming him, so while there are some rules at play, they're hard to nail down. See this combo? Guaranteed teleport. See this same combo but he doesn't get pushed back as far because of the wall? No teleport. Distance is a factor? ? He's very likely to teleport when he's in defense mode if you leave him alone, so the rhythm here seems pretty cut and dry. Attack him until he's in defense mode, relent, let him teleport. But of course, while he's a lot more likely to teleport, he's not guaranteed to. I suspect there may be a second threshold. It's not enough to just put him in defense mode, you need to raise his value a little bit higher to prime him to teleport, but I can't confirm this. That said, I do feel safe in positing that the higher his defense value, the more likely the teleport if you leave him be. What is leaving him be, though? Well, as distance is a factor, I found it most effective to at least get out of super close range. It's not necessary, but I've noticed if I stick right to him, he tends to attack more often than not. So, good examples of leaving him be would be retreating and shooting, or what I find most effective, hitting him with a heavy attack and waiting. The stagger animation from a heavy will push Nelo out of your range, and you can taunt or shoot him as he recovers and probably teleports. Now, there is a bit of risk in relying on this function in general. You should always anticipate that he might not teleport, but it is consistent enough for me to recommend it. Once you're aware of this system, you can find yourself in interesting scenarios where you're trying to make sure he's actually in defense mode so you can relent and he'll teleport. And of course, since he teleports somewhat at random, he can always surprise you. That said, there is an even more reliable way to get him to teleport, one that doesn't depend on you betting that he's in defense mode. Regardless of what mode he's in, landing a full combo on his back or just spamming him from behind guarantees a teleport. If he's blocking and you just get behind him, he'll teleport. These are technically superior alternatives, 100% consistent, but I would argue they're inferior in terms of style. If he presents his back to you, if jumping over him is your best bet at the time and it happens organically, whatever, go for it. But intentionally, exclusively, trying to get behind him to attack, it's not very gutsy. Jumping behind him is just... what are we doing here? I like this contextual balancing, if that's a term. Relying on defense mode is inarguably a lot cooler. You can just taunt in his face and he'll run away. Hit him with a quick stinger and leave him. Or, what I do, helm splitter behind him. Just a quick tap to remind him blocking won't work on me. Dante is clearly in control here, and it makes Nelo look like a pussy. But this only works if he is being a pussy. If he's in defense mode. You have to earn these cheeky moments. Hopping behind him so he teleports is a lot easier, but it makes it seem like you were trying to go for an attack and he got away. Spamming him from behind often ensures he'll dodge an attack. You're making Nelo do what you want him to, but it doesn't look that way. But all told, that's how you get him out of defense mode. Make him teleport. This defense mode system is pretty cool. Mechanically, it ups Nelo's resistance in a fitting and responsive way. The harder you squeeze him, the less juice comes out, as it were. It gives him opportunities to turn the tables on you if you have too much of an upper hand. Contextually, I think this system exists to incentivize you to make Dante act in a way that seems honorable. In a way that would make this rival fight look like a rival fight. Take Nelo's example. He gave you space. He let you do your shit. You have to give him some. Let him use his attacks. Let him teleport. Allow him to completely reorient himself and try again. What really sells this notion of honor to me is the fact that there is a choice. That if you keep spamming him, he won't teleport. It's an opportunity you need to give him. Honor is a choice. In this case, it's an obvious choice. You want larger damage windows, but it is a choice nonetheless. If Nelo was merely programmed to teleport away once you've done enough damage or raised his value high enough, you wouldn't have that same sense of responsibility. I relented. I allowed you to teleport. You're doing this next attack because I let you. It goes some way in capturing a feeling of honor. It affords you an opportunity to reciprocate how Nelo treated you. And mind you, this manifests in different ways. You can adopt the put him in defense mode, relent, let him teleport routine, but once you're more familiar with Nelo's mechanics, you can get through a fight without ever putting him in defense mode. Or you'll get him out of it so quickly it's barely noticeable. This also results in a style of play that, is more befitting of an honorable fight. Short exchanges in which one of you emerge victorious, punctuated by a teleport to reset the playing field. Funnily enough, the structure mandated in subsequent Virgil fights. The fact that you can just keep Nelo in defense mode, though, works to bolster the underlying power fantasy of DMC. Rival fight? You can just pin Nelo in a corner and chip his health down to 0 while he struggles to let out the occasional streak. Rival fight. Dante is skilled enough not to let Nelo have a chance. Don't you feel cool? The game allows you to dominate like this, but limits your returns from this approach to incentivize against it fully. It goes back to what I said. This is something you can do for a period of the fight just to flex. And I'm very glad the devs put this on offer. It lends the fight a more organic quality. A fight where you remain aggressive will see Nelo acting very differently from a fight where you're more passive. It just means the flow of the fight has greater potential for variance. It is more dependent on the player's input. There is a sense of order you find in many action bosses. Behaviors that they repeat, attacks they use at specific times, a set flow to the fight. On the whole, Nelo is no exception, but he does allow you to disrupt that order far more than most bosses would. And there's something to be said for the effect that has. Real fights are chaotic. They don't have a flow, and I think this works to capture that. It's notable that in every subsequent Virgil fight, he will teleport away once you've hit him enough, giving you no choice in the matter. This has its benefits, of course. It's ultimately a topic for another day, but these fights absolutely feel more orderly as a result. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is the nuance of directional attacks and combo finishers. Heavy attacks. Your directionals, Stinger, High Time, Helm Splitter, Kick, Magma Drive, and Jump Kick, are incredibly useful attacks for their movement properties. In most scenarios, one of these moves will be your fastest option to hit him. But of course, hitting Nelo with any of these attacks will cause him to block immediately, regardless of his defense value. Provided he's not in defense mode, the next opening you get will still be a good one, but you spent an opening you had. This interaction is a trap many new players will fall into, preemptively closing their damage window by carelessly throwing in a directional. That's because no other boss nor enemy will punish the use of heavy attacks. For most enemies, they're invaluable. The best way to consistently open them up to be comboed. Phantom, the first boss, encouraged them almost exclusively. Stinger does extra damage, Helm Splitter exploits his weak point, High Time causes him to stagger sooner, and this is the best way I've found to parry his fireballs. Nelo is the only enemy in the game to respond negatively. It's surprising, and it can take a while for players to clock what's actually happening and why. Many players may not really grasp the distinction between heavy and light attacks, or that directionals and combo finishers share this property. Since so many attacks have unique properties, it's easy to just consider each one its own thing, and not consider those they share. I really like this quirk. It's a neat bit of balancing. Directionals are your most useful moves for hitting and interrupting him, yet your least useful for doing damage. Your most useful moves for taking an opening, yet your least useful for capitalizing on it. The game rewards you more for capitalizing on an opening with a combo, which means you need to be close to him when that opening presents itself. Or you need to stun him, which is harder to do. I also find directional attacks to be more stylish. I find it cooler to respond to a streak with a backflip into a helm splitter than just a backflip. But it is the less efficient option. If I've stunned him but I'm too far away to make it to him in time by slow walking, I'd rather use a stinger than run. I sacrifice my opening for a cool interaction. He's gonna block my next attack. However, if you come correct, that's not necessarily a drawback. You can bait a retaliation and make an opening from there. With DT, it's basically guaranteed. Watch, stinger into him, he starts blocking, enter DT, and just stagger him out of his retaliation. The only risk here is that he does a fuck-off attack instead, but if you're prepared, that too can lead to an opening. Another thing you could do, what I would probably do, is just leave him be after you've staggered him. If you don't keep attacking, you won't force him to block because he's not actually in defense mode yet. Instead, you know that as soon as the stagger animation ends, he'll probably go straight into an attack. And if you're close, you know what that attack will be. Bingo. Directionals put you in a good position to make openings. They can't make openings themselves, parrying notwithstanding, nor capitalize on them. As such, I liken my use of them to resetting him. You can see in the footage, I'm basically just resetting him until he does an attack I want. An attack I can parry. I really like how directionals take on a more technical role here. It's very much unlike any other fight in the game in that respect. Heavy use of directionals also characterize Dante as far more aggressive. You can hit him a lot more frequently, land attacks that are incidental to your movement, but it comes at a cost. You need to follow up appropriately to actually do any worthwhile damage. I also like how this quirk characterizes Nelo, but we'll get to that shortly. Because with that is Nelo Angelo. Those are the mechanics that generally underpin him. I've basically described the second fight. The third fight has a few additions, and the first a couple subtractions. To summarize the first, he doesn't have any of his melee attacks. No punch kick, no uppercut, thank God, no jump kick, because this is a rival fight, and you don't have Ifrit yet. He's not gonna mirror moves you don't have. That's not how mirrors work. That's neat. As such, if he does a rising high time and you get distance, since he doesn't have the jump kick, he'll just fall to the ground like that. Impotently. To compensate for his shallow move pool, he'll spam streak a lot in this fight. A lot in this fight. His defense mode threshold is higher than in other fights, meaning you can hit him more before he enters defense mode. He can only parry up to 4 times consecutively before you're guaranteed a stun, but it's very likely you'll stun him with 1 or 2 parries a lot of the time. Yeah, that's the first fight. It's easy. It's the easy one. Somehow he beats you, though. Don't question it. It's Virgil. He's allowed to do that. He always does that. And we still love him, don't we? Hey, bro, remember how you genocided half the population? Wait, are you smiling? Aw. Let's summarize everything we've been over and put it together, shall we? So, his behavior is dependent on your distance to him. He'll try to get close to you or force you closer to him. At close range, he's at his most dangerous, with access to his entire moveset, but if you get right up to him, his move pool is limited and far more predictable. You can dodge all of his attacks and punish him after, you can interrupt a lot of his attacks by hitting him, and of course, you can parry his sword attacks. When parried, he goes into one of his 3 retaliations, and will keep retaliating until he's stunned. Parrying him will push you back in human mode and generate DT, but you can spend DT to hard parry and regain proximity. You can use a parry match to either get him to a stun, interrupt his retaliation for an opening, or get out of the way, letting him finish his attack in the hopes of creating an opening. Once you hit him enough, he'll eventually enter defense mode and start blocking. If you keep wailing on him, you'll get small openings and risk baiting his fuck-off attacks. If you let him get attacks out, you might get better openings, but it's best to make him teleport so he definitely exits defense mode. Given he actually is in defense mode, all you have to do is give him a chance and he'll take it. If not, he's always vulnerable from behind, and if you combo his back, you'll force him to teleport. He can teleport to any distance, the fight continues, and that's basically it. Also, I didn't mention this because it's pretty fundamental, but of course, hitting him in Devil Trigger does way more damage at the cost of the resource. Hitting him in human mode does less, but generates the resource. In Dante Must Die, you basically only do good damage in DT. Oh my god, that's nothing. As with the rest of the game, DT management is an underlying dynamic. But with parrying to account for, this is probably the one fight in the game in which you most want to ensure you're always sitting on enough DT to pop it if you need to hard parry. That is the basic premise of this fight. And with all of this established, it's time to analyze what these mechanics achieve. Before we get into the analysis of Nelo's behaviors, I first want to look at how Nelo comes across to an average player, someone playing for the first time. Between his reactions, his retaliations, the various reasons he'll block, his teleporting, his proximity-dependent behaviors, and his misleading telegraphs, you've got a bevy of simple systems working together to create a distinctly inscrutable boss. It's not at all easy to figure out his behaviors. I mean, think about his blocking. To even begin to understand that there is a defense mode or how it works, you need to clock that he blocks gunfire, and blocks after a heavy attack, and that those are unrelated. To even begin to understand that, players need to clock what qualifies as a heavy attack in the first place. Until you start getting a grasp on things, the Nelo fights feel messy, inconsistent. It's hard to distinguish the difference between an opening and half a second after an opening, so it may seem like he randomly parries you when you try to attack. His defense mechanism only triggers while he's walking. If he chooses to ready a meteor as you stinger towards him, you may get the impression he's always open from a distance. It's very easy to make false assumptions. There may even be some in this video. And it's hard to distinguish what truly is random. Why did he follow high time with a jump kick and not a helm splitter? Is there a way to tell beforehand? Why couldn't I stagger him out of uppercut this time when I could before? And of course, the elements of RNG work to further obscure his behavioral logic. Why did he choose this retaliation? Why did he get stunned after this parry? Why did he follow high time into the air? You've got a lot of systems to isolate and suss out in order to understand his behavior. And Nelo seems to be designed in such a way to make this as hard as possible. But of course, you do not need to understand or master all or even any of these systems to beat him. So it's unlikely you ever will if you're just playing casually. Instead, you will butt your head against them, clumsily work around them. You'll find openings here and there, a pattern or two, things that you can do that work kind of consistently, without actually understanding the full extent of why. Why he's doing the things he's doing, and why what you're doing is working. On earlier difficulties, you have a large margin for error. You deal unfair damage, so it's perfectly feasible to get through Nelo without grasping most of his behaviors, or knowing how to exploit them. You don't need to predictively parry him. You don't need to hard parry him. You don't need to parry him to a stun. You don't even need to know how to dodge his retaliations. You don't need to know what makes him block. You don't need to know about defense mode. You don't need to break his guard. We'll get to that. You don't need to know what makes him teleport. You don't need to know that teleporting affects his behavior. You don't even need to know that he's vulnerable from behind. Bosses can often be boiled down to a single system that must be mastered to a certain degree to win. Anyone who's beaten a Zelda boss, as an extreme example, can tell you exactly how to beat it, and that answer will be practically identical to everyone else's. Goma. Shoot him in the eye. Nelo, however, is a confluence of multiple systems that can be exploited in multiple ways. So unlike a shoot them in the eye or feed him bombs, there's no one aha answer anyone who's beaten this boss will give you. Answers will vary from person to person. Look at parrying. One player may rely on initiating a match only to pop DT and take an immediate opening. Another may bait retaliations just to avoid them so Nelo can present openings. A third may learn to parry him to a stun. A fourth may avoid parrying like the plague, and a fifth has no clue what they're doing and inadvertently does all of the above over the course of a fight. Each of these approaches is valid, and any of these players may, understandably, assume that they found the correct way to contend with this mechanic. Essentially, there are a lot of ways to skin this cat, and a newcomer will likely use a knife for the ears, a cheese grater for the back, a hook for the tail, and their fingernails for the rest. I've been told there are many ways to skin a cat. I don't... like a knife, right? What else would you use? As Devil May Cry's combat is predicated on variety and player expression, and the overall structure of the game emphasizes replayability, it's obvious how this approach to enemy design is well chosen, to leverage that variety to allow for expression and justify the replayability. The fact that any of many strategies can carry you through the fight if you're good enough at it means the player is not explicitly told by the game that they're missing anything. You could treat this boss as a stereotypical action boss, avoid attacks and punish openings, unaware of the other ways to exploit him. On the other end of the spectrum, a parry god could not know Nelo is simply vulnerable from behind. There is space for you to develop your own style in regards to fighting him, and there will likely be more for you to discover next time. This, of course, keeps the fight interesting over the course of countless playthroughs, and for a new player, it keeps Nelo feeling inscrutable. Most of the bosses in the game can generally be understood to a workable extent quite quickly. There's little consequence to writing off their behaviors as the boss is doing attacks at random or in a set pattern. It doesn't usually matter why they do the things they do, it only matters whether or not you're able to avoid or exploit them. With Nelo, the why is a lot more consequential. You'd want to know why he parried you here and not here. You'd want to know why he's blocking. You'd want to know what he's going to follow his rising high time with. Without this knowledge, while victory is still certainly attainable, Nelo's a lot more liable to surprise you than the other bosses, to get a cheeky hit in or throw you off.
What? Why didn't he stagger that time, dude?
And that unpredictability, that inscrutability, I think characterizes Nelo wonderfully. Again, Nelo reads more as a display of skill than one of power. He feels intelligent. He commands respect when you fight him, because until you learn him properly, you really have to stay on your toes. So as for the initial impression Nelo gives off to a new player, he can be particularly frustrating, vexing, and intimidating. Successful runs will often feel messy, and many of the hits Nelo gets in can feel cheap. That doesn't sound like a glowing assessment, and to a certain extent it isn't. However, he will at least impart an impression. He will stick out among the bosses as that motherfucker. That guy who gave you a fair fight, but still got those fucking hits in. That one boss you're not sure that you can master. Overall, I would say the most successful aspect of Nelo's first impression is characterization. He will stick with the player as something threatening, unpredictable, and inscrutable. But he can be scruted. He is able to scrute. He can be understood to an extent. And now we can look at how his behaviors support the notion of a rival fight from the perspective of someone who does understand. I'd like to bring in some contemporary points of comparison for this section, because although I think Nelo's quality is evident in isolation, I'd also like to demonstrate that said quality was in fact exceptional for the time. These contemporaries are Dark Link from Ocarina, Doppelganger from Symphony of the Night, and Evil Samanosuke from Onimusha. So, surface level stuff. Nelo uses your attacks, and he staggers to each hit. This second point is to convey the idea that he is as vulnerable as you, especially compared to other bosses who shrug your attacks off, but as is the case with you, skill makes up the difference. This is a good start, but it is ground zero for rival fights and can apply to all of his contemporaries. So, going a bit deeper, he is highly reactive. The ability to adapt and respond appropriately to the context is a defining characteristic of the player in any game. As such, it's a common trope to emphasize reactive behaviors in rival fights to imbue them with some semblance of intelligence that mirrors your own. Dark Link parries, dodges, and counters your thrusts. Doppelganger can avoid your spells. Evil Samanosuke can block you and punish aggression. This is a trope because it works. It veers the impression of the boss further away from a program cycling through attacks at random towards the feeling that they are being controlled by an opposing player, someone who can aptly respond to your input. But now the question becomes, well, what are his reactions? As is to be expected in a fight, the theme underlying all of his reactions is countering, negating what you do or punishing you for doing it. But the first thing that sets Nelo apart from his contemporaries is how all-encompassing his reactions are. For reference, Dark Link can respond to 5 of the many things you can do, Evil Samanosuke 3, and Doppelganger only 1, maybe 2. Nelo, on the other hand, counters you in almost every conceivable way. He will attack you as soon as you enter his range, countering your attempt to get close. He'll follow a rising high time with a helm splitter, but if you try to get away, he'll go for the jump kick instead. Countered. There's the post-meteor stinger poke, remember that? You try to hit him when he does meteor, but if you're not fast enough, countered. There's the aerial punish he'll do if you're dumb enough to be in the air when he's open. Countered. Then, of course, comes parrying. His defense mechanism is probably the most clean-cut example of a counter. Try to attack him? Countered. If you miss an opening by half a second? Countered. If you parry him, an action that anywhere else would be strictly rewarded, he can retaliate. Countered. And finally, his blocking. If you try to hit him at range, countered. If you hit him with a directional attack, the easiest attacks to hit him with, the attacks that anywhere else would make your best openings, he'll start blocking. Countered. If you hit him enough, he enters defense mode and refuses to present any good openings. The mere notion that you're doing well, countered. And if you keep pressuring him, you will bait his fuck-off attacks, the only moves that will force you to retreat. Countered. That's 10. 10 unique reactions meant to counter you. So far, I'm saving one for later. Doppelganger had 1, the poor guy. And then there are his performative counters. They're not actual reactions, but their function is to feel as such. There are his attacks that seem designed to throw you off. 2 streaks, one of which you can interrupt, the other of which you can't. Punch, kick, and uppercut, one of which you can interrupt, the other of which you can't. I assume these attacks are supposed to elicit the wrong response from you, leading to what feels like a counter. There's High Time, the telegraph of which seems purpose-built to function as a counter. And I suppose you could throw his teleporting in there. I know it doesn't feel like it when you want him to teleport, but he is technically dodging you, taking away an opening you would have had otherwise, ergo, countered. His behaviors are geared towards exploiting all of your modes of engagement. He erects walls along every one of your usual avenues to success in this game. Getting close to the enemy, spamming them, shooting them, using your directionals, trying to learn their tells, parrying them, hell, even using Devil Trigger can put you at a disadvantage. He turns everything against you, has an answer for everything. All of his behaviors work to support the notion that this guy is your match. This is already a significant step up from his contemporaries, but that's just the start of it. The second thing that separates Nelo from the others, what I believe makes Nelo the pinnacle of this archetype in his time, is what you are to do in the face of his counters. This is a rival fight. Counter them. Bait and respond to his counters. This is the sauce. The answer to Dark Link, Doppelganger, and Samanosuke's reactions is simply not to trigger them. There's no way to turn them to your advantage. They are your match to the extent that they can limit part of your moveset, and that's it. That's fine, that gets the point across, but here we have so much more going on. Nelo's counters only limit you to the extent that you allow them to. It's not just that Nelo is your match, you are his. He attacks as soon as you enter super close range? Well, that's easy to predict. His defense mechanism? Merely a way to initiate a parry match. A parry match? Merely a way for you to make an opening. Blocking after a heavy attack? Oh, that's cute. Defense mode? A way to keep him pinned down. A way to make him teleport. Teleporting? Great time to taunt. Great time to charge a meteor. Bullshit untelegraphed post-meteor stinger poke? I don't think so. Aerial Punisher? Get fucked. You're blocking my gunfire? You know I get DT from that, right? This really is top-tier game design in regards to balancing mechanical, narrative, and aesthetic conceits. This is exceptional work. Not just the aesthetics of him using your attacks against you, not just supporting the notion of a rival by giving him behaviors meant to counter you, but eliciting those same behaviors in the player. Contextually, Nelo is your reflection. Mechanically, if you want to get the most out of this fight, you are meant to reflect him. God, that's good! And at the center of this battle is parrying, the mechanic that best connotes a sense of equal matchedness, to be leveraged by either side to counter the other. Now, I'm not claiming Nelo is the progenitor of this design ethic. Rather, I'm just remarking that this is fucking excellent design, man. Staggeringly well considered, expertly executed. This is a rival fight. Comparing him to his contemporaries, bosses from highly regarded and beloved action games, well, I love you, is like comparing a monster truck to a bicycle. They are different vehicles. Of course, DMC is more combat-centric than these games, so you'd expect bosses to be more robust on average. The comparison isn't the fairest, but that only serves to underline the fact that Nelo had no worthy point of comparison. A blessing and a curse that comes with being genre-defining. He stands alone in his time. These other fights merely have you contend with the fact that some of your moves will be rendered ineffective. They rival you. Nelo gives you the opportunity to render his attempts to render your moves ineffective. If you can play well, you rival each other. And when you do rival each other, how does the fight change? From the perspective of a Machiavellian player, the ideal scenario would be that you could bait an extremely exploitable response from Nelo consistently to trivialize the fight. An extreme example of this approach is found in Phantom 2, or 3, or 6, depending on how you count it. If you stay out of sight, you bait his jump attack. And if you make him jump on the skylight 4 times, he dies. You don't even have to fight him. There are a few ways to achieve something like this with Nelo. The game does offer some insane, consistent beatdown strats, but for the most part, this is not how exploiting his behaviors plays out. Most of Nelo's reactions have some element of RNG baked into them. RNG, or systems so subtle they are indistinguishable from, is often a key element in a boss's difficulty and replayability. keeping the boss threatening, keeping each run distinct. You know what they might do, but never what they will do. Even when you play proactively, when you bait his responses, you still have to deal with this element for the most part. It's still very much a fight, not a routine. If you parry him, you don't know what retaliation he'll use. You don't know if a parry will stun him. You don't know how many times you can hit his guard before he responds, and you don't know what that response will be. When you enter super close range, although the 4-hit is most likely, he can surprise you with a high time or a punch kick. As such, you can't bank on his reactions to anywhere near the same extent. With Phantom, I could mostly turn my brain off for the fight, knowing everything will go my way. With Nelo, I always have to prepare for a number of eventualities. For the most part, forcing Nelo's reactions is not a means to trivialize the fight. So what is it a means for? Well, given the size of Nelo's move pool, at close range, Nelo is the most unpredictable enemy in the game. A quality exacerbated by the fact that his attacks have the shortest telegraphs on average out of any boss. You don't know what he'll do, and when he does it, you may need to react instantly. Nelo's reactions, although not absolutely predictable, are still far more predictable than his actions. So forcing them is not necessarily a means to trivialize the challenge, but rather to convert the nature of the challenge to something more consistent. There's a really cool balance here, but I think I have to illustrate it. If you're using the basic bitch strategy, letting Nelo act first so you can dodge and respond, Nelo can pull from a move pool of 9 at random at close range. And let's say he'll attack like every 2 seconds or so. He's rolling a 9-sided die every 2 seconds. If you're playing proactively, if you attack his guard, parry him, or enter super close range, he pulls from a much shallower move pool. He becomes significantly more predictable. But if you keep parrying him, if you keep wailing on his guard, if you stay in range, he pulls from that pool far more often. He's only rolling a 3-sided die, but 3 times every 2 seconds. When you play proactively, you deal with less RNG more often. You have fewer things to account for, but you have to account for them more frequently. By the end of 2 seconds, the proactive player has technically engaged with as much, if not more, RNG, has had to respond to more things, but the interaction was broken up into much more predictable chunks. Essentially, a proactive player makes a trade-off. You make Nelo less unpredictable, but more aggressive. This is quite elegant. Contextually, Nelo becomes more aggressive to match your aggression. Rival fight and all that. And you can imagine when someone is acting aggressively, when someone is being pressured, they're less refined as a result, which equates to a smaller move pool. Mechanically, calculated proactive play indicates that the player is skilled. As a rival, Nelo responds to such an approach by increasing the skill demand required to keep engaging. If you're playing like this, you should be able to handle it, right? You're expected to be able to react and make precise inputs faster than you otherwise would, but assured in the fact that Nelo will be working with a far more limited moveset. There's also something to be said for responsibility here. I want to underline again that parry matches can be very fast. It can feel excessive, and even the most skilled of players can get clipped, but it was your decision to initiate it. If you've ever teased your sibling, when they eventually snap and hit you as a result, it's hard to feel transgressed or affronted. Yeah, I was kinda asking for it. That's a quality I think is captured here. This opt-in dynamic gives the game license to be more demanding than might otherwise be reasonable. An excuse to let Nelo rise to the challenge you present him. Ultimately, preserving an element of RNG in his reactions is a very strong choice. If he had a single response to each of your actions, it'd be a matter of time before you solved him. Write off the reactions that are disadvantageous, prioritize those that aren't, and you're done. It could be fun to learn, but it wouldn't be particularly replayable. It would present the notion of a rival fight until you figure it out. Instead, a lot of Nelo's reactions might be advantageous. And since they are ultimately more predictable than letting him make the first move, you're still compelled to engage. Even after countless playthroughs, every fight feels fresh. Even when you're playing proactively, he can turn the tables. Even when you really know what you're doing here, he's your match. Now, it may seem odd that proactivity isn't strictly rewarded. You could argue that playing proactively makes the fight harder, if anything else. Well, two things. First off, if this were the case, there is still the incentive of style. Playing proactively simply looks so much cooler. Dante looks cooler. I'd argue this alone suffices as an incentive to engage in the fight like this, although I would agree the incentive could stand to be bolstered. Second off, this isn't the case and the incentive is indeed bolstered. One thing I haven't factored into the equation yet is Devil Trigger. If you have Devil Trigger, you can exploit his reactions immediately. It doesn't matter what retaliation he does, you're getting an opening. At super close range, it doesn't matter what move he does, you're getting an opening. And if he's blocking, you're more likely to get an opening than not. What balances this out, of course, is the fact that you have to earn DT. And appropriately, the fastest way to earn DT is by playing proactively without it. You make him more aggressive, equating to more DT earning interactions more frequently. You stun him more often, giving you more opportunities to taunt, and hitting him while he's blocking earns DT to boot. Now this is really elegant design. DT management is a key aspect of every fight, especially in DMD, but I can't think of any other boss nor enemy that plays to this system in a more interesting and particular way than Nelo. For most fights, you use DT when you know you have an opening, and you earn DT by biding your time and taunting at the opportune moment. Here, you use DT to make your openings, and you earn it through aggression. Isn't that sick? Looking at all this, how this boss's behaviors were constructed, you kinda have to just marvel at it, man. This is peak shit. This is the best offering from the best action game at the time, and you can feel that. Yet, there is still more to cover. Now, although most of Nelo's reactions preserve an element of RNG, he has a few that are absolutely consistent. The post-meteor stinger poke, the aerial punish, teleporting when attacked from behind, blocking in response to a heavy attack, and one more I'm still holding on to that we're about to get to. These are reactions you can predict with 100% certainty, and unsurprisingly, the potential to curb stomp him lies among them. Most of them, though, have been balanced to keep them from being too exploitable. Making him teleport doesn't get you an opening. Parrying the stinger poke risks a parry match, although you can power through with DT. Parrying the aerial punish does minimal damage and presents no opening, but forcing him to block. This behavior is the means for what I assume is the intended beatdown strat. The consistent solution for players who just want that S rank. But I'm gonna put that to the side for now. This video, so far, has not been about how to engage with this fight. Rather, this has been an exploration of his behaviors. How they constitute a challenge, a stylish fight, a character, and how they afford you options. Yes, I told you about the jump behind him strat, but that is the lamest of all strats. You can have it. We will get to the part you play eventually, the specific ways you can exploit his behaviors, but that is a separate discussion. That being said, I am compelled here to talk about what I assume is an unintended beatdown strat, because it works as a fitting culmination of this discussion on behaviors. It's time to get to this final reaction I've been saving. His most fundamental counter. It's finally time we got back to this. So, if you hit Nelo from the front with a light attack, if you hit him with your most basic of basic moves and leave him be, he'll hit back. Countered. Now I am obligated to bring up an exception that I've found. If you backflip away directly after hitting him, that is, jump away while locked on, there is a good chance he'll walk or teleport instead. If you hit him with the first 4 hits of your 5-hit combo and backflip away, it seems to guarantee a teleport. This is a niche, weird edge case that gave me a headache and I hate it, but accepting that, the rule is that if you hit him from the front with a light attack and leave him, he will hit back. And if you're close, it will be the 4-hit. It stings when your combo pushes him out of reach of your finisher, but this mechanic is primarily to allow Nelo to interrupt or break out of your combos. Million Stab requires you to pause between inputs, and if you hold the pause too long, Nelo will attack and parry you out of the combo. You can interrupt an Alistair combo to charge round trip. You can charge each hit of Ifrit's combo, and Nelo ain't having it. If you start charging, he will hit you well before you're fully charged. On the surface, this is just another way for him to turn the tables on you. But, as you would expect, you can use this to your advantage. So, Million Stab presents a risk. He might parry you out of it. Bait that response, activate DT, and hard parry him out of it. Countered, so you can't fully charge a round trip. Charge it just enough that he readies his attack, then release it to parry and continue attacking. Countered. And come on, that's so clean. So you can't fully charge an Ifrit punch. Charge it enough to bait the attack and parry, or activate DT and hard parry. Doing this, you have a chance to stun him, leaving you free to charge up the motherfucking heel drop on him. Countered. If you want to take it even further, it seems the stagger animation from a light attack is timed to a T to allow you to end your current combo and parry his inevitable attack with the start of a new one. In which case... yeah, this goes hard. And since you're letting him ready an attack at regular intervals, it takes a while to get him into defense mode doing this. This is yet another perfect example of the central philosophy of this boss. A behavior meant to counter you that you can turn into a stylish and advantageous interaction if you have the skill or resources. But this reaction presents an issue. The, I believe, unintended curb stomp strategy. I want to give the developers their due. They attempted to balance this reaction out as they did with the others. The only way you're turning this to your advantage is with skill or devil trigger, but something fell through the cracks, which is understandable because this reaction alone isn't the problem. Rather, it is this reaction in conjunction with 2 of the other rules governing Nelo's behavior, and it's particularly effective because none of these rules involve RNG. It is uncharacteristically dependable and exploitable. And if you've been paying attention, you may have formulated this strategy already. As soon as I list these rules together, it will seem obvious. So the rules are: 1. If you hit him with a light attack, he hits back. 2. The only attack he can do at long range is Meteor. 3. Meteor resets his defense value. So, combo him, leave him on a light attack, jump into long range, which requires locking off, don't backflip, and he'll use Meteor, which resets his defense value and presents an immediate opening. Yes, he's dead. You can loop him like this indefinitely, and as such, this is a very common speedrun strat. I don't know why Meteor resets his defense value. This could have been avoided. Now, I'm going to shelve how the potential for strategies like these factor into my assessment of Nelo for quite a bit later. It just felt appropriate to bring it up now because it is a direct consequence of his behaviors. But I will leave you with some things to consider. Firstly, as demonstrated with Phantom, DMC1 is no stranger to letting you bypass bosses entirely. As a game that champions player expression, giving the players the option not to engage with a fight turns engaging with the fight into an instance of such. Playing Nelo straight is no longer what you have to do to beat the game, but rather how you choose to beat the game. Secondly, this strategy all but requires mastering the fight to find organically. And finally, I'll leave you with this question. Does this strategy look cool. And that brings us to the last thing I want to touch on before concluding this analysis of behaviors: the aesthetics of the fight. Part of the goal in designing fights in Devil May Cry is to make them look cool when played well. So what is being achieved here? I mentioned that Nelo was likely inspired by Darth Vader, and my suspicion is that the emphasis on parrying, parry matches, and blocking was in part an attempt to emulate a lightsaber duel. Darth Maul had taken the world by storm during this game's development. This right here was the epitome of stylish combat in the zeitgeist at the time. Imagine if you could capture this in a game, to make the player responsible for this. One of the most distinct attributes of the Darth Maul fight, as with all prequel fights, is fluidity. Since the combatants have superhuman reflexes, exchanges in the fight can be very fast, and it can be hard to distinguish who's on offense or defense at any one moment. This just looks like two unreasonably adept swordsmen clashing blades at incredible speeds. Or, as I've said multiple times by this point, who's parrying who? Between Nelo's hair trigger reactions and the speed of parry matches, you can absolutely find yourself in moments that capture precisely this quality. While DMC1 may not reach blockbuster caliber choreography throughout, it absolutely has its moments. A factor that contributes to this sense of fluidity is an emphasis on something I call invisible telegraphing, wherein attacks are telegraphed, but in a meta sense. If I show you this Dark Souls boss, you can infer that the character saw this attack coming and dodged. Here, how the hell did Dante know how to respond? That is some Jedi shit. This effect is common in bosses to an extent, and is in fact most easily achieved with the simplest type of boss that cycles through attacks in a set order, but it's a particularly well-chosen effect to elicit for this game, where you want combat to look stylish, where you want to depict Dante as inhumanly talented. Nelo's combo attacks achieve the desired effect. The kick in Punch Kick has no wind-up, but since it's always preceded by the punch, you can avoid it as it comes out. The same is true for the high time following his uppercut, the high time following his horizontal slash, the helm splitter or jump kick he'll do when he's airborne, the latter hits of his 4-hit combo, and the taunts that follow certain attacks. None of these moves have any discrete visual indicators, so when you respond to them, it seems like Dante is reacting at light speed. It seems choreographed. This may sound unremarkable. I mean, any boss that has a combo attack achieves this effect incidentally, but as with Nelo's reactions, what's praiseworthy is how extensively this principle has been leveraged. When put into perspective, the majority of Nelo's attacks at least have a component that can be responded to reliably without any conventional telegraph. But his combo attacks, I believe, are secondary anyway. His most prominent examples of invisible telegraphing are, of course, his reactions. I know he'll attack me when I enter his range. I don't need him to signpost it. When in range, I know he'll attack me as soon as he can, so my telegraph is actually whatever animation he's engaged in now. I know an attack is coming if I hit him with a light attack. If I'm sure he's in defense mode, I can start taunting before or as Nelo starts blocking or teleporting. The same is true if I've just comboed him from behind. Learning how he'll react tees you up to respond to moves that he hasn't even begun yet. In a way, you are the telegraph. And when this all comes together, that's just anime, man. Look at this. The developers absolutely succeeded here. And I think it's commendable that this aesthetic conceit didn't come at the cost of challenge, replayability, complexity, or the narrative integrity of the boss. Again, this effect is very easy to achieve the simpler or more consistent the boss is. But the approach the devs took here, relying more on reactive behaviors and combo attacks rather than heavy scripting, works to allow for these moments without making Nelo stupid, without making the boss rote. A simple case of memorization. In this way, you do not take on the role of an actor playing a Jedi. You just are a Jedi. The aesthetics of this fight are really hard to sniff at. Yes, a parry is not as flashy as it could be. The lack of a recoil animation can make individual parries hard to register sometimes, and the camera can't always complement your crazy moves, but a concerted effort was clearly made to ensure Nelo's mechanics would translate to a sexy fight scene if you're playing well. It's just good. And with that, we finally draw to the end of this segment. Overall, if my breakdown of his behaviors didn't make this evident, Nelo is an incredibly well-considered piece of engineering. It's probably redundant by this point, but let's go back to the functions of a DMC boss. A challenging test of the mechanics, and an opponent that lends themselves to a stylish fight scene. An opponent that rewards a multitude of approaches and offers opportunities for cinematic interactions. I think it's fair to say, Nelo knocks it out of the park. Nelo knocks it through the window of a passing airplane and takes out a passenger as collateral damage. He is a shining example of a boss that provides a variety of visually and mechanically distinct ways to exploit a variety of systems. One that provides a sufficient, appropriate, and distinct challenge. One that is complex enough to remain compelling, intuitive enough to be mastered, and of course, fun enough to revisit endlessly. He does have his flaws. The lack of a consistent parry indicator can make what's happening harder to read than it could be. Uppercut feels overly punishing, and Zoo is just wonky, but man, he does so many things right. He is an excellent test of the mechanics, an excellent example of mechanical characterization, an excellent rival, and an excellent co-star in your stylish fight scene. His design more than satisfies the various lofty conceits of Devil May Cry, and is ultimately more robust than some action games' entire boss rosters combined. It's insane how well this boss holds up over 20 years later. How even today, he makes action bosses seem shallow and trite by comparison. Now, we're gonna look at your abilities. What can Dante do? We've been over Nelo's behaviors, his attacks, some of the interactions on offer, but I haven't really gone into your options in detail. If you're thinking of playing DMC, if this video has made you feel like experiencing the Nelo fights or giving them another go, I'd recommend you stop here. In fact, I'm making you stop here. This is the end of part 1. Learning how to exploit his behaviors, how to utilize your toolkit, and forming your own style in regard to this fight is a large part of the enjoyment to be had here. I've given you a lot of leads, a lot of tips, and he'll be a lot easier to engage with now that you know what's actually going on, but there are plenty of things left to discover. So I'm giving you a couple months, maybe more, to do so before I spoil it all in part 2. I hope you give him a shot. Until then, thanks for watching.
It's all right, everyone. Dante's gonna use that devil trigger of his.
How you guys doing? I hope you're doing good. I have some stuff to go over before I leave. I have some thanks to give, some shoutouts to make, channel updates, but before we get to any of that, I first want to explain what this project is. So this is part 1 of 3 similarly lengthed videos on Nelo Angelo. Yeah, I didn't expect it to be this long. The full script is written, although I'm sure I'll update it, but yeah, a lot of the "we'll talk about that laters" and the "we'll get to that's" were referring to the next parts. I didn't plan for this to be in parts initially, but if I didn't do it this way, you wouldn't have heard from me for like another 2 years, so I thought this was the right approach. An unforeseen consequence of breaking the script up retroactively, though, is that this video alone may leave you with a bit of a false impression. You know, I have intentionally left out context. There are some kind of like rug pulls coming down the road, and I didn't consider any of that an issue until I realized how long it's probably going to be between parts. None of this should matter when all the parts are out and I edit them together, but for now, just know that this very much isn't the full picture. We will talk about Ifrit. We will talk about what style is to DMC1, the structure of the game, incentives, balancing, all things that will recontextualize what you take away from this part. As for this project, though, this was more of an undertaking than I had imagined. I thought the whole thing was going to be like an hour and a half, and I didn't realize the extent of my ambition until I was too deep to back out. In-depth boss analysis is something I've always wanted to do. I'd love to do more. There's a reason I'm starting with Nelo, but practically speaking, this project is maybe a bit too ambitious for where my channel is at right now. I will finish the other parts eventually. I want to finish them, but how highly I prioritize them is, of course, going to depend on the reception. If it turns out no one wants this, it's probably not the move to spend another year making more, right? Do you want this? What do you think? As of now, the next parts will be on the back burner while I work on some smaller, possibly chiller projects. Hopefully, you'll be hearing from me sooner this time. But speaking of you, hi. There are 5,000 of you now. Where the fuck did you come from? Thank you so much. I never would have imagined this channel would grow the way that it did. I'm glad the videos have been resonating. Your comments make my day. I truly can't thank you enough. I'm gonna keep on keeping on. I've got ideas, more games to gibber about incessantly, and I hope you stick around. If you'd like to support this channel and make projects like this fucking thing more feasible, I have opened a Patreon. Subbing to any tier will give you access to ad-free videos, exclusive access to the first video I ever made. It is cringe and will never be on YouTube. I'll be making posts on games. You can check out my thoughts on Digital Devil Saga, and I do feet pics. So if you're interested, there's a link in the description. Oh, and I'll also have your name in the credits. I have one sub at the moment. Give it a minute. There he is. Legend. And that brings me neatly to my next topic. I would like to give a huge thanks to my proofreaders, watchers, and general keeping me sane-ers, Max and Cord. Thank you guys so much. I couldn't have done it without you. Cord actually has a channel. His first video is coming sometime this year, but until then, he streams weekly, tries to stream weekly. He's doing his first playthrough of the FromSoft games at the moment, and you can expect to see me pop up there from time to time, so come say hi. Link again in the description. Next, I'd like to shout out the lovely people over in the DMC modding community who helped me get this Nelo model, particularly the Garlic Goblin and Kane. Kane also has a channel where he posts his mod work if you're interested. Check it out, he's fighting 10 Goliaths. Why? I'd also like to thank fellow YouTuber Sight Avery for allowing me to use his footage to clown on him. Absolute homie. Check out his channel. I think his Kingdom Hearts videos are woefully underappreciated. And thank you to everyone else who contributed. Going back to the video for a second though, there is one really stupid mistake I need to address. When I said, now, moving forward, whenever I mention high time, remember that that really means high time or rising high time into an aerial combo. I started conceptualizing high time as one move, but whenever I referred back to his close range move pool, I would say he has 9 moves, which is counting high time and rising separately. So whenever I say he has 9 moves, or he's rolling a 9-sided die, I meant to say 8. It will be fixed in the final version of the video. But yeah. Finally, I would very much like to recommend 2, I think, incredibly underrated channels that I think you would probably like. I tend to retreat into my goblin cave for months at a time, so maybe they can hold you over until I return. When you watch their videos and appreciate all the hard work they put into them, you can think of me. First off is Theo T. Tree. He's pretty new on the scene, but so far, all of his videos have been excellent. Insightful, well-written, interesting. If he keeps at it, I think we'll see some really good stuff from him, and your support will hopefully make that more likely. So check him out. If I had to recommend one video, it would be the video on lock-on systems. Next, is Blue Bidya Game. The dude behind this channel, Rusty, is either inhumanly driven and committed, or legitimately insane and kind of delusional, because he wants to make a retrospective video on every PS1 game in alphanumerical order. And he's doing it. He's been at it for about 3 years, and he recently reached the letter A. I can't wait for Vagrant's story. And these are videos, dude. Extensively researched, well edited, funny, and they're just a vibe. They're cozy, nostalgic, even if you've never heard of the game he's talking about, and you get to learn about obscure Japanese games, and doing that makes you cool. If I had to recommend one video, watch the one on Geppy X. It's fucking mad. We don't make games like this anymore. It also helps that Rusty is just a really nice guy. He sent a lot of positivity my way, and I'm trying to make sure that comes back around. Be nice to people. Thanks again for watching.